Good afternoon, everybody. If you could, I think we're getting ready to start. If you can make your way and sit down, and we can get the program going. All right. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank everybody for coming today to our Ag Auto Ethanol Work Group Annual Forum. I don't have the exact number of years, but this is about 12 years of this sort of annual meeting of fuel automakers and ethanol and agriculture stakeholders have gathered to discuss our vision for using high-octane low-carbon fuels. So we have a diverse number of stakeholders that are involved in the work group. These are some of our, from associations to automakers to ethanol producers, agriculture, corn growers, academia, and other industry partners. And you may have heard that we have a new administration and some things have been changing in DC. We've also have updated our vision for the Ag Auto Ethanol Group to kind of help align with what we're trying to do and also with some of the administration priorities. But we also think that some of these priorities will resonate in potential future administrations, even beyond what's happening today. So our vision is North American vehicle powertrain technologies fueled by higher octane low carbon fuels will be deployed at scale to create jobs, drive economic growth, enable consumer choice, support domestic energy production, and help attain global transport sector emission and efficiency goals. So the leadership team met before our meeting today, and we discussed this new vision, and we hope that everyone is embraced our new vision and mission. So with that, we're going to move into the meat of our program today. We have a little bit of shuffling of our agenda that was sent out. We're going to be moving the regulatory reform panel to later after the break, and then moving up the pending petitions, and then the good news, we have food and fuel. So those will be coming ahead of the break, and then the panel discussion will be after the break. So with that, I'm going to move into our updates on pending petitions. We have Michael Bushmacher from Boyd and Gray. Thank you.
Thank you. The future was electric, I think, is kind of the slogan I took away from how things have been developing. I do love the kind of more Nixonian title for the whole thing that Ernie came up with of liquid fuels are back, baby, because it has sort of the silent majority aspect to it. And maybe I'll stop getting pictures of Patty Hearst sent to me by people who work for the automakers every time they stand up in the Rose Garden and say something stupid. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to summarize quickly for you all where things stand with the ongoing litigation about electric vehicle mandates and some related issues, and kind of go through the legal arguments and what the future holds. And I'll also cover the Congressional Review Act resolutions that passed the Senate last week. So how we got here with the Biden administration putting a really aggressive target for electrification in place. Of course, there's no law that you could point to that says, Congress or the president says, here's what the right level of electrification for the new vehicle market is. This was a executive fiat kind of thing. And it was what they call the whole of government approach, which the way I understood that at least was like if you take a little bit of authority here and a little bit of authority there and a little bit of authority from this statute and that statute and this agency and that agency and put it all together, well, you can create power that you never really had to begin with to do things that Congress never said that the executive branch should do. And this was based on three main pillars: EPA's tailpipe emission standards, NHTSA's fuel economy standards, and then California's rules that they can get waivers for under Section 209B of the Clean Air Act. So the first ones came out, you can see, very late 2021, 2022. These were immediately challenged. I'll get to those cases in just a few minutes, but then they were followed up by much more aggressive phase 2 rules that took the legal theories that were in play and really pushed them to go much further. So you've got here the EPA tailpipe emission standards for light duty and for heavy duty that drive up to about 60%, 67% or so electrification. CAFE standards that largely mirror that, though not quite, because NHTSA is forbidden from considering electric vehicles when it's setting standards, and even the Biden NHTSA folks couldn't come up with a way of completely ignoring that, so they were unable to harmonize those regulations. And then you've got the California electric vehicle mandates, the kind of three most important ones here: Advanced Clean Cars 2, of course, 100% electric vehicle mandate by 2035, which has been adopted by about 11, 12 other states or something like that, and DC. So a good 30% of the market. Advanced Clean Trucks, about 11 states for that, I think. And that's like depending on what kind of class vehicle you're looking at, the mandate is different, but it's between 40 and 75% nominal requirement. And then these omnibus low NOx standards, which are not electric vehicle mandates. They're ostensibly just about controlling nitrogen oxides, but they have compliance flexibilities built in that encourage and probably, as a practical matter, mandate electrification. And then there are, just a few other things. There are more than these last three at the bottom, but there are a few kind of other odds and ends. The Department of Energy sets what's called the petroleum equivalency factor. So the CAFE compliance calculation system is absurdly complicated, as many of you know. And one of the things that has to happen is like, well, if you're going to put EVs in on the compliance side, which they're allowed to do under CAFE, how are you going to determine their fuel economy? Because they don't have a fuel economy in the sense of there's no gallons being consumed. So the equivalency is determined by DOE. It uses a complicated 4-factor test. And on top of that, going back to the Clinton administration, there was a multiplier, a fuel content factor, which they took from an actual statute created to help incentivize E85. And so they divide, and when you think about it, E85, it's nominally 85% ethanol. So if your concern is preserving or being economical with gasoline, well, every mile that's traveled, 0.15 of that is coming from the gasoline. Nominal, it's actually lower. We all know that, but that was what Congress did for ethanol. And so you divide by 0.15 to get your number, basically multiply by 666%, which is much more ominous. I like that a lot more. When we litigated this, like the song I listened to in my hotel room before I went to court to argue was Iron Maiden's "The Number of the Beast." Highly recommend it. So they, going back to the Clinton administration, DOE put in place a very similar fuel content factor out of whole cloth. It's not in any statute, saying that they could also multiply the efficiency of electric vehicles by 666% for the CAFE compliance calculation. The Federal Highway Administration, FHWA, also had some odd rules that basically told states that you have to make a declining plan at your Department of Transportation to have lower emissions. They said that you don't need to meet that plan, so you could just lie, though maybe that would violate the False Claims Act, I don't know. And so that was, designed to basically encourage states to adopt California's electric vehicle standards. And then as part of the 2027 multi-pollutant standards, but there's the R factor, which is basically a calculation for the NHTSA, again, and it's a compliance calculation thing where you have to attribute, so if you change the energy density of a fuel, for instance, by adding more ethanol, how effectively can the cars adapt? And that effectiveness is what's called the R factor. And so EPA set an R factor unjustifiably low in my view, based on a really junky study, and then sneaked it into this model year 2027 light duty multi-pollutant standards rule. I'll get to what we did about that in a second. So those are the main things that were in play. This is kind of old news, right? But here, how does the electric vehicle mandate work as a practical matter in the EPA national standards? And it's, you can't actually meet the standards with real cars that use liquid fuels. So you have to increase the number of electric vehicles in your fleet. So you can see there that line is kind of where you have to get, and everything above that is what's actually out there on the market. So the solution, right? Sell more EVs, make more EVs, or buy credits from Tesla. Back when Tesla was something that people like Gavin Newsom liked. So end result, as I mentioned before, 60%, 68% EVs. So in California, right, just a few more data points on this. They've got a bunch of rules and have been working on transforming their smog authority under the Clean Air Act to doing climate policy instead. And so that has reached ahead in these latest ones, the omnibus regulations and Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks. They also have a number of agreements out there, including the Clean Truck Partnership, which with basically everybody who makes heavy duty truck and engine trucks and engines. Those folks basically entered an agreement. The agreement's outrageous. It says, we promise to never sue, and we promise that even if someone else sues and they win, that we will still abide by these regulations. So I'm sure they didn't do it willingly. It was the kind of thing that the kind of protection racket strategy California loves, where they say, it's a nice industry you got there, and come make a deal with us or else. And what their ultimate goal, that's the CARB headquarters in Riverside. You can see it's a fossil fuel station. So it's like all modern art. It's this elaborate pun. And it's, that's where they're headed. So basically all of this has been challenged in court. And I'll just walk through quickly what all the cases are and what their status is. So let's start with the federal ones. For EPA and NHTSA, that phase one, those two phase one rules were immediately challenged in the DC circuit. They still haven't actually gotten any rulings on them though. Those have been sitting. We did move after the change in administration to hold those in abeyance to pause them. The court hasn't even ruled on those requests. So I think that probably means someday we'll get a ruling in those. If I had to, make a prediction, since we're in Chatham House rules, and I think our chances on the EPA case were not so great, but the chances on the NHTSA case were pretty good. Then you've got the sort of phase two rules beneath that, model year 2027. Those are all paused. So the NHTSA one is actually not in the DC circuit, it's in the 6th circuit. But the EPA ones are both in the DC circuit, and they're all paused. Then you've got on the California side of things, Advanced Clean Cars 1. This was the sort of nominal 22% mandate that initially got a waiver back in 2012, was rescinded by the Trump administration the first time around in 2019, and then put back in place in 2022. And the DC circuit did rule on that one. And what they said is, you fuel manufacturers haven't shown that if this mandate went away, it would stop mandating EVs. You didn't do enough. You didn't get an automaker affidavit or something saying that if the mandate went away, they would change their behavior. So guess what? We don't even have jurisdiction to hear your case. This is not the kind of thing courts were invented to do. Too bad. If that sounds implausible to you, I think it also sounded a little implausible to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court granted cert on this, right? They don't have to take cases, but they get to decide when they're going to, and that they granted review in that case. It was argued back last month, got to sit at council table, which was a fun experience. The court usually issues rulings by the end of June, maybe early July, but I'm feeling pretty good about that one. So, we finally had our day in court to see if we're going to have our day in court. And so maybe after that happens, we'll actually get our day in court. We'll see. Shows how long, after the argument, one of my clients said, is there anything we can do to make this process go any faster? We challenged this in 2022 and we're still here. And I said, it's very easy. You can just join MS-13. Supreme Court will get to your case like that, actually. Somehow that wasn't persuasive. They haven't done that. Maybe it's because they don't want to move to El Salvador. So Advanced Clean Cars 2, we challenged that after a waiver was granted at the very end of the Biden administration. That one is paused. It's in both, there are petitions in a couple of different circuits, some in the DC circuit, some in the Ninth Circuit. Same with Advanced Clean Trucks. This was finalized back in 2023, so it was challenged at the time. And that's also paused. It's been paused for years now, actually. The low NOx rules are also same story. They were challenged, they've been paused. You kind of catch the theme here, right? The Clean Truck Partnership, we brought a challenge to that as well in federal district court in Illinois. That one is currently just at the early stages of litigation. It's going to be really interesting to see how things play out with, now that the Congressional Review Act has taken away those, or will, upon presidential signature, take away the waivers for those rules, what that will mean for that litigation. And then Advanced Clean Fleets, I didn't really cover this, but California, realized that forcing people to sell stuff doesn't necessarily mean anyone wants to buy it. So they came up with a rule making people buy an increasing number of electric vehicles for their fleets, even if they didn't work for them. Talk to a friend who's in the rental industry. He's like, yeah, basically we're installing an art park of different EVs that we don't use. They just sit there. So that waiver was too far even for the Biden EPA to grant. So instead, California just withdrew its request. There's litigation about that going on in California federal court in Sacramento. And that's now that CARB has agreed to rescind its rules, those cases are all getting settled. And then finally, you've got the other agency rules, some of the ones I covered. So you've got the petroleum equivalency factor. I argued that back in January in the Eighth Circuit. So we're just waiting for a decision. Could be any day now. R factor, we challenged that in the Fifth Circuit. It's actually under a different statute, so we didn't get locked into the DC Circuit with that one. Got to go to a better court. My partner Jimmy, who you'll hear from later today, argued that just a few weeks ago. So we'll see, when that comes out, but should be a few more months probably. And then the FHWA greenhouse gas reduction rule, those lost in district court and were appealed by the Biden administration. The Trump administration dropped those appeals, so the injunction at the trial court level is now permanent and stays in place. So that's the rapid survey of kind of most of the stuff. Some of the legal arguments for EPA, the main arguments are that it's a major questions doctrine issue. So the Supreme Court has said, basically, if it's very important economically, politically, we don't expect Congress to use mealy-mouthed words to tell the agency what to do. We expect it to be clear. If you give an important instruction, you say it clearly. And so the argument there is that this is a big deal, right? It's trillions of dollars. It's what people are going to drive. People care about it. And so you would expect something clearer than what you have in the Clean Air Act. So that's one argument. Then two is that basically EPA can't do emissions averaging. This is different than the CAFE program. CAFE, Corporate Average fuel economy, it's the second word in the acronym, right, is averaging. But there's actually not something like that in the Clean Air Act. Of course, automakers love it, and I understand why. It's a sensible way of running things, but it's probably not in the statute. So that's one of the other arguments there. The other is that it kind of mixes and matches things. So EPA says the class of vehicles emits the pollutant in question, carbon dioxide, but actually they say EVs don't because they don't have tailpipes. So it's kind of weird to mix in something. It's like if you had a class of, immunosuppressant drugs, and then you put in that class something that wasn't an immunosuppressant drug, and people would be like, what are you talking about? That'd be a very weird way of defining class. What EPA says about that, just so I'm giving fair play to what the Biden EPA said, is that class here means something more like, oh, the school bus was rowdy. Like, it doesn't mean every single kid on the school bus was rowdy. It just means somewhere in the whole atmosphere was one of rowdiness. So that's the legal question there. And then there are just some, arbitrary and capricious arguments basically saying that the costs and the way that the rule is written fail to sort of meet basic rationality. NHTSA pretty similar, major questions, doctrine, same principle. There's also this prohibition on considering electric vehicles, and NHTSA did consider them and said, we are considering them, just not in the standard setting years. So we consider the effects of our rules before and after on electrification, but not during the standard setting years, with the one exception of we do consider the EVs that are going to be on the road because of California's regulations. So that, was a stretched legal argument in my view. And then in any event, the California standards are illegal in our view. So, can't use those in the baseline as NHTSA did. And then there are plenty of other arbitrary and capricious arguments that have been raised, including my favorite one, which is the energy efficiency gap, which is the idea that people are too dumb to know what to buy. And so they will buy something that's cheaper now, even though it'll cost more in the long run. And the studies they used for this did not justify the timeline that they put on consumers at all. And they just admitted that and say, well, we don't know why this exists, and we don't know why it does what it does, but we're just going to do it. That's a fun move on their part. And then California, again, you're going to see a theme: major questions doctrine. And then there are 3 requirements in Section 209B about when California can get a waiver of preemption. They have to need it to meet compelling and extraordinary conditions in the state. I should have moved the quotation mark over. It doesn't actually say in the state. Don't tell the courts that though. So basically, you don't need these things to do anything about your local air pollution problems. You just want to become a global climate regulator and industrial policy setting body. Okay, well, that's not the same thing. EV mandates are not something EPA can do under its regulations, in its regulations under 202A of the Clean Air Act. And the 209B provisions say that what California does has to be consistent with 202A. So that's another argument. And then there's a point that they're impermissibly related to fuel economy, which you're not allowed to do if you're a state, even if you have a Clean Air Act waiver. And then the last argument, which is one the states have focused on, is that making California sort of more equal than everybody else violates the constitutional equal sovereignty principle, which is sort of a federalism idea that states actually are all equal. So those are the main, arguments in brief. Now what? It's not quite the Hummer. So day one, executive order on unleashing American energy. We're going to get rid of the EV mandate. I do love how President Trump always talks about it like it was a single thing. As you can see, it's like it's not. Or if it is a single thing, it has many constituent parts. So kind of like the Ohio State University or something like that. The EV mandate. So they've been aggressively moving to get rid of these things, but these regulations take time. The first thing that's happened, it's been the Congressional Review Act. Just in a shameless plug, you'll see back in January, someone had an idea about this and put it in the Wall Street Journal and said, hey, here's how you could use the Congressional Review Act to get rid of these Clean Air Act waivers. Turns out that idea got some traction. So the Trump administration submitted these waivers to Congress. The Congressional Review Act works like this. It's a filibuster-free accelerated pathway that you can get if on to repeal an agency rule. And in order to do that, there's kind of time constraints, has to be within 60 days, which can be calculated in a few different ways. So it only really matters at the end of an administration when there's a turnover. And what became very important is it applies only to agency rules of general applicability. So the Government Accountability Office said, inserted themselves in the process in a way they'd never done before and said, oh, we don't think that waivers are rules of general applicability. And therefore that the Congressional Review Act doesn't apply. Senate parliamentarian said, I'll do whatever GAO says. So deferring to someone who's deferring to someone became what, a lot of folks in the Senate were arguing should happen. Turns out that that didn't work. And so last week, the Senate voted to repeal those three rules, ACC2, ACT, and the omnibus rule. Strong bipartisan support for this. I mean, remarkable in our day and age to have this much aisle crossing. And it just goes to show that electrification mandates are not just a terrible idea, but they're very unpopular. Something like 80% of Americans oppose them. And a majority of both Democrats and Republicans oppose them. So you had 35 in the House, 35 Democrats in the House, including remarkably 2 from California. And then Senator Slotkin from Michigan crossed over in the Senate. So no exact date that I'm aware of yet for the signature, but that's going to come soon. And it's going to have a lot of, it's going to have a long range effect as well, because under the Congressional Review Act, agencies are prohibited from ever doing something substantially similar ever again. So that's going to get tested at some point, no doubt. A lot of Section 177 states were already abandoning the California's, at least its timeline. We're waiving penalties and things like that, which by the way violates the Clean Air Act because you have to be identical. And so they stopped making them identical, but whatever. It's too late now. And the CRA also says there's no judicial review. And when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense, because what is a Congressional Review Act resolution? Went to the House, went to the Senate, gets signed by the president. That the Constitution has a word for that. It's a law. And the idea that Congress can't take away something that it gives seems like a stretch. California, however, has vowed to sue. You can see Ms. Randolph from CARB scowling there in the background. You'll note on the marketing, this is really interesting to me, the Make America Smoggy Again, right? These regulations are climate regulations. They're not. They have a little bit of window dressing about conventional pollutants, but it shows you, I think, where kind of the American mind is now, that climate regulation is viewed with suspicion in a way that conventional pollutant regulation is not. And so they are understandably trying to recast what they're doing. So we'll see. California is going to sue. And presumably that's going to tee up a fight about the scope of the Congressional Review Act. Normally I'd say that should be dead in the water, but we've seen some pretty innovative, maybe that's a neutral word, innovative district court rulings over the last several months. So who knows? It should be a lot of fun. And then there's a lot of stuff in the hopper that's obviously going to lead to litigation too. Proposals are expected from EPA and NHTSA getting rid of their tailpipe and cafe regs and putting new ones in place. There's a project at EPA right now to get rid of what's called the endangerment finding, which is this prerequisite to regulating greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act. So they've said they want to revisit that. A couple ways they can do that. Looks like they're actually going to focus on a narrower pathway to start, which wouldn't be about vehicles. It would be about stationary sources. The reason is because the statutes are written a little bit differently. Title I says significantly contribute, and Title II says contribute. And so they're picking, an easier platform for arguing why the finding should be undone. Also, I'll note, and if you have just happened to read the many hundreds of pages of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, you will see that in there, there is language that would repeal the NHTSA and EPA rules simply by legislation. That will have to get through the reconciliation process to become law, which means it's got a probably fairly tough road ahead of it, but I won't bore you with the details of this, but basically it's got to have it's got to be closely connected to a economic impact. And here it's about the tax credits. So more EVs means more tax credits gets, drains the federal fisc. So all that's coming, and litigation will be inevitable. So those cases that are all paused, there'll be a new version of those for all the repeal rules. And I'll probably be back here next year and the year after that. And I hope not too many more years after that, talking about these kind of things. But that's the pathway that we're on. It's a big ship, takes a long time to turn around, but especially with the CRA, there's a lot of change happening very quickly. And it's been very exciting to see the auto industry come off the sidelines and really do the right thing and stand up for American consumers and for sensible regulation. So I'm hopeful that that is a pattern that will continue because, I can't remember who it was. An old CEO of GM once said that, what's good for GM is what's good for the country. And we should get back to that. And that's what I'm hopeful that in our conversations and everything else this week, we will be moving further and further in that direction. So I'll end there. And if you've got questions, happy to take them. Okay, there are microphones, so.
Thanks. Keith Klein, Oak Ridge. I'm not a lawyer, so I wanted to make sure I understood the Supreme Court decision that's coming is simply going to determine whether or not your other case can proceed.
That's right. Okay. So there's a legal doctrine called standing, which is, basically
so it's all about the standing.
Right. Okay, and so the only question the court took was, do we have standing? And, we'll see. If they say yes, then we get to actually go and make our substantive arguments again.
And then on the slide you went through with all the cases, a whole bunch of them were paused or stayed. Is that because there's a similar case somewhere else, or is what's
that's
happening?
A great question. That's a great question. So so one of those cases was stayed because there was because the court said there was a similar case, and that was the challenge to ACT. And they said that's similar to the challenge to ACC 1 and to the challenge to the first tailpipe rules. And so they paused that. They paused that back in 2023. The other ones are paused because there's been a change in presidential administration. And for better or worse, the usual course of action when there's a change and an agency is reconsidering something is for the courts to just wait. It does mean that we never get answers to these questions. No, people have been litigating about whether California can mandate electric vehicles and do climate policy for well over a decade, and we don't have a single merits ruling on the statute. Some might think that is the court's dodging stuff on purpose, but I'm not going to say that out loud.
But this is Jack Marshall, right?
What was that? Yeah, sure.
Do we vote for?
Does the Senate have any history on voting against the parliamentarian?
So they actually did not go against the parliamentarian here. There was a very clever set of procedures that they used and some very old Senate practices where they teed up, and I'm not making this up. It was like whether a point of order is in order when another point of order is pending. And they had this quadruple bank shot sort of thing that put the ultimate procedural question to the Senate in the first instance. And the Senate decided by a majority vote what the rule would be, which is basically if it gets sent over by an agency, procedurally, we're going to treat it as if it's a rule. That did sidestep the parliamentarian, but it didn't overrule her. She wasn't actually consulted on it when it came to the vote. In terms of, is that unusual? Yes, it's happened a few times before where they actually have gone against her advice. But as far as I know, this is the first time this kind of quadruple bank shot thing was used. It was very clever.
So if you were representing Gavin Newsom, what legal theory would you use to attack the loss of privilege that the CRA is doing?
I have been scratching my head and laying up in bed late at night trying to think what arguments they're going to bring. because it's not easy to think of. I mean, the main argument, though, the easy argument to make is that, oh, it's not a rule. The reason why that's wrong is because like the GAO opinion I mentioned said, well, it's so particular to California. It's like a Social Security disability benefits determination or a grazing permit. And the problem is no grazing permit lets you, not only this one guy can bring his cattle on the land, but then everyone else in the neighborhood can do that too. But that's how the Clean Air Act works, because every other state in the country can copy it. And also there's a case out of the Ninth Circuit of all places that says, I think quite persuasively, that a delegation of regulatory authority from a federal agency to a state is a rule. So, you could see someone coming out the other way on this substantive question, but that's an internal matter of procedure for the Senate. Like, it's hard for me to see like what you're going to say, that the Senate made a mistake and that the law is therefore invalid. Like, they voted, they have the votes, they get to set their own internal rules, and the CRA says no one else can question them. So maybe they'll say like due process or something like that, but I'm sure there are some very smart lawyers in Sacramento and Riverside working very hard on coming up with something, but it's difficult for me to think of what it would be.
One more. On the endangerment finding, there's an argument that says regulating greenhouse gases provides protection from litigation on those matters. How's that being considered as the administration is thinking about that?
I don't have too much inside info on how they're, aside from this little tidbit about they're probably going to do it on the Title I stationary source, not the Title II. But the argument you're referring to is basically this: like, Massachusetts versus EPA is this case from 2008 that says the Clean Air Act's definition of pollutant can be read in such a way as to include greenhouse gases. But in the first instance, whether to regulate that is a question that the Clean Air Act gives to the agency to make a determination about whether it will, in the judgment of the administrator, that substance can cause or contribute to something that risks human health and welfare. And since then, right, there have been greenhouse gas regulations on the federal level. And there's a case called AAE versus Connecticut that says if you, because of the Clean Air Act regulating in this space, it displaces what's called federal common law, sort of just judge-made law. And the Clean Air Act is the only regulatory thing for greenhouse gas emissions and just emissions generally. So there are two different things. One, if you get rid of endangerment, that doesn't require getting rid of Massachusetts versus EPA. So in that sense, that alone doesn't undo any of the issue. If you, however, say Massachusetts versus EPA is wrong, that undermines the argument for AEP, and that could then open up the door to federal common law claims against energy companies or whoever else, all of us really, everyone who breathes, or for every cow that farts, right? Those are sources of greenhouse gas emissions, and so they could be the subject of lawsuits. You've heard about the climate superfund laws and things like that. So it may sow some confusion. There are definitely ways they can go about this that would not jeopardize that, but whether they will and whether state courts will get the message clearly, it's a big question mark. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Next up, we have Keith Klein from Oak Ridge National Laboratories, here to talk about we can have food and fuel.
Earthquake. Thank you for inviting me. This is my first AAE, and I had to look it up to figure it out. Is that right? The ag auto ethanol? Trying to figure out what it even stood for. But it's great to be back in Michigan. I'm a University of Michigan School of Natural Resources graduate, formerly known as a forestry school. Now something like SEAS. Anyway, they keep changing the name. But I do appreciate the invitation and hope we can collaborate. That was a really interesting talk, and I'm looking forward to the next panel. Forward, yeah. So why am I here? Kind of why do I care about these things? Kind of perhaps why Mike West suggested I be invited. I'm going to briefly mention that and some of our current research, some outputs that may be of interest to this group, and then, although I was asked to come and talk about the good news of food and fuel, I'm going to ask you guys to maybe give me some input on what should we be doing next, especially given our current uncertainties about the future administration and DOE. So I was raised here in Michigan on a family farm, and I know we're here in part to in memory of honor of Luce, yeah, Dave Luce. And I actually lost both of my parents this year, just my mom just a few weeks ago. And they were salt of the earth farmers, farm family, 8 kids. I'm one of 8. And whoops, and I'm going faster than I thought. Anyway, they believed, and I believe we're here to try to make the world a little better place for future generations and all of our grandkids. I ended up going overseas and worked for 24 years on international development, mostly with farmers. And in that frontier area, the forest ag frontiers, trying to help find more sustainable opportunities for the people in those areas to improve their livelihoods while also maintaining productivity. When I returned to the US, long story, I landed at Oak Ridge, and this paper came out in Science by a guy named Searchinger that claimed that biofuel policy and the renewable fuel standard was causing land use change. And I just spent 24 years actually developing strategies and policies to try to stop land use change. It had nothing to do. Where this is happening, people have no idea what the price of corn is, much less is it impacting what's happening. So I wrote a response that was published in Science, and since then I've been caught in this quagmire. I've contributed to several ISO and ASTM standards that bring in land use change and sustainability questions. I've helped the EPA with their triennial reports. I know they're not favored reading for many of us, but I can tell you they'd be a lot worse if me and a few others weren't involved. The last triennial report, 360 pages, does include the fact that the effects of the renewable fuel standard on land use change are somewhere between 0 and some other number they made up based on models. The 0 is there because I was there in that process. And I credit EPA for listening and looking at the data that showed there wasn't evidence beyond the models for anything more. So 0 is in that report. So I've seen what is possible. I've had I could share some stories about amazing impacts, but in general, my bones are telling me I'm getting old. They're sore all the time. And after all these years, I've come to realize we can't measure everything. We need to focus on what's most important. We can't do everything. We need to collaborate together on what's most important. And I think science is really important. Science is simply asking good questions and testing hypotheses with evidence, things you can measure and verify. And if we don't have that foundation of science, we're going to have problems. Those are that's the summary of everything else. So last 3 years, I've had some fun working on something called the Clean Energy Ministerial Biofuture Platform Initiative, mouthful, which is a once-a-year gathering of about 30 countries now and other international organizations that represent about 95% of all emissions in the world. And the idea was for everyone to get together and share best practices and try to promote acceleration of the transition to cleaner energy. And one part of that was the bioeconomy. So the Biofuture Platform Initiative has just these member countries. And I was there to help on this middle box with a check mark, consensus on biomass sustainability, availability, and governance. That was kind of assigned to me with funding from DOE. And last year, just as an example, we had a work stream with several products, and they're available online. I share this mostly because there are some resources available under the BioFuture platform resources tab. What are good practices for biomass sustainability production and use? Tools to manage risk if you're dealing with biomass as an input or a feedstock, and maybe what we could do to find common ground and address some of the stakeholder concerns. In 2024, we had 4 specific actions that we basically completed, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but I do want to mention that we have online, and I'll give you a QR code you can copy here in a minute, a new database. One of the things we were trying to answer is the question that's come up over and over again when especially other countries and developing countries try to promote biomass as a feedstock. People say, well, there's not enough biomass. And there's a lot of pushback, especially from outsiders, saying there's not enough biomass. And so we're trying to help document where there is sustainable biomass and how much there is both now and potentially in the future, following the same sort of process that we did for the billion ton for the United States. And I was involved in 3 of those billion tons. So anyway, that's a long-term initiative. It just started last year. Now we don't know if we're going to have any continued funding, but there's a report available, and we're also working with some of the mission innovation groups on biomass availability for carbon dioxide. The SEM BioFuture, this project basically works towards recommendations to ministers and governments at these once-a-year meetings. And the G20 and SEM met together last year, and we had a series of workshops leading up to that and reports that provided recommendations on improving the consistency of how we measure carbon intensity and GHG emissions, and trying to find ways to increase demand for and supply chain development, investment and development of supply chains for feedstocks for sustainable fuels. A series of reports came out. I'm not going to, again, this will be available with the links for everybody afterwards. But we felt good that we were able to get a lot done. Of course, now it's not clear as of today whether I can continue working with the SEM at all, funded by DOE. So everything's kind of on hold. I've been taking a lot of vacation time and kind of waiting to hear what's going to happen. But we did contribute to this IAA report on carbon accounting for sustainable biofuels, which was the first place that IAA really came out and said ILUC numbers should not be used to detract from the effectiveness of biofuels to decarbonize transportation fuels. And that was a major accomplishment to convince IAA of that. I thought, this is not IAA Bioenergy, this is IAA headquarters in Paris. And I'm taking for granted that this group understands that the whole food versus fuel thing is really built on the ILUC, indirect land use change. And maybe I'm jumping ahead on some of these assumptions, but ILUC is indirect land use change. The idea that if we use soybeans or corn in the United States for fuels, then someone has to make up for that somewhere else, or there's going to be a shortage of food. And it's an indirect effect of using the biofuels that causes the concerns in the models for both deforestation and for food security. This report on carbon emission or on sustainable fuels and carbon accounting found that there are several areas where there's the opportunity to reduce emissions and verify those reductions fairly easily. Other places like direct land use change and nitrogen emissions, where there's opportunities to reduce emissions, but it's a little harder to verify how much progress you're making. And then there's an outlier where there's huge variability in what people think the impact is, and no way to verify it. And this process, the workshops and reports we did leading up to this report is what helped IAA agree that ILUC should not be quantified as a factor. The second report reinforced the first one. The first one was on carbon accounting for biofuels. The second one was broader, common criteria for sustainable fuels, because we want to be able to compare all fuels in the fairest way possible when it comes to their effects. So that report is also available, and that report suggested that maybe we need a scorecard, kind of like nutrition labels on food we get, that could indicate approximately where someone is in terms of their greenhouse gas emission intensity. But as they noted, there's a lot of potential to improve every single pathway. And they gave examples in the report, which I think is kind of an interesting concept. And this is one of the future activities for work that we could consider spending some effort on in the next year. The recommendations that we came up with based on consensus that we presented to G20 ended up being adopted almost verbatim in the IMO's guidelines for carbon accounting, greenhouse gas accounting. This is the International Maritime Organization for Sustainable Fuels for Shipping, for maritime shipping. ICAO, the International Consortium for Aviation, and their CORSIA is a lot stricter and still based on a lot of modeling and a lot of, in my opinion, bad assumptions. Is a lot more restrictive on what can be used for feedstocks. But IMO is following more the recent IEA and our recommendations to be technology and feedstock neutral, agnostic. Give me your performance numbers that you can verify, and that will determine what your score is. So I think that's a step in the right direction. That's a positive impact. And then coming back to this question of, is there enough biomass? This is an activity that's being led by Ryan Jacobson at Oak Ridge now. And we have 49 reports so far covering 58 countries. We're still collecting more data and updating data. And it's available online right here. And it's the same website and the same structure of a website that we have for the billion-ton study, but we're collecting data from all these other countries and trying to get it, and this is really hard, compatible in terms of units, moisture content, and everything else. And it's a huge undertaking, but we're working on it. Now, what about food security? That's what you guys asked me to come talk about. My research and everything I've observed in my 45 years, and I went back and checked, I've been getting Social Security, reports on work since 1970. So, of course, I started on the farm at home. But commodity outputs and land area are not limiting global food, and they're not really limited for bioenergy production. We have plenty of land. And we have plenty of commodities. As you know, anyone that knows farm prices right now, corn and soybean are not really, the prices have not really gone up significantly or improved in terms of profits, especially when you look at your input costs, hardly at all. You can look at 50 years or 100 years, and it's actually been pretty consistent. And that we did some calculations based on productivity of land, and we didn't even use the numbers from Netherlands in their greenhouses, which would make it even much smaller, but just on dry land agriculture in good climate and good soil. 1/20 of current agricultural land could feed the world in 2050, 10 billion people. If we wanted to do it right, if we wanted to really manage it intensively and well. Why do we keep clearing land? Why do we keep having deforestation that becomes agriculture? Because someone's making a quick buck on it, or someone's claiming the land. And it's always been that way. And everywhere I worked, and I've worked in South America, Central America, and Africa, on these frontiers, that's been the case. It's not that we had the Homestead Act in the United States. Did we have to clear that land because of the demand for corn or oats? No, people wanted the land and they had to clear it in order to claim it. It was required. That's exactly how it's been happening all around the world. Some places a little more, how would I put it? A little more involvement of certain people making windfall profits than others. I'll say it that way. Anyway, we don't need to be clearing land to feed the world, but we do need to invest in better production and recover some of the land that's been disturbed. Based on the initial billion-ton work, at the request of something called EFI, we did a little side study, and we have a report. I think it's in the references that are going to be available at the end. And we looked at how much biomass in the US has no risk or minimum risk for land use change and impacts on food security. And of course, waste and residues and from crops and timberland wouldn't have that effect. Winter cover crops aren't going to cause any food security or land use change. Wildfire fuel reduction risks aren't going to cause that. Energy grasses on idle cropland would not cause that. We could do even more if we could harvest from CRP, but we didn't include that. Biomass from managed rangeland, if we just use 4% of current managed rangeland to manage it a little better, we could get quite a bit of biomass. On brownfield sites, there's some special studies about how much we could get that are citable. Peri-urban right-of-ways, special use when you're clearing. Right now, we use a lot of pesticides or herbicides to keep biomass from growing in areas that we could. The part that's accessible, 2% of the total, we could get quite a bit of biomass from that area. Precision agriculture and diet shifts could be huge. They're not calculated precisely, they're estimated here. But there's a whole lot of biomass that we could have without issues of food security. The other thing we saw is that around the world today, because we have good information, good communications, if there's a drought, for example, in the United States in 2012, 2013, Brazil and Australia can respond, and they can respond quickly. Now, did they respond by clearing more land? No. They've got plenty of land already cleared, looking for something they can grow and sell. And they want to respond to a market opportunity. It's got to be where there's infrastructure and roads and process. These market responses that the models say caused land clearing, when you look at the data, did not and do not. And we don't really need to grow more food when 40% of what we produce on the land or more goes to waste. Common number is 30%, but that's after it's gotten to some sort of a commercial handling situation. It's being measured. There's another 10 to 20% that's left on fields and isn't even getting counted in most statistics. So my conclusion, working a lot with developing countries, is that we can provide options to better use and add value to a lot of production. With bioenergy is one part of a more integrated solution. It's not the answer, but it's one of many things that can be done that can help. And we have some good reports and papers that describe that. The BioFuture Project has an international technical advisory group, and Glaucia Mendes de Sousa, who leads BioN in Brazil, is a member. And she asked us for input, and we helped them prepare a fact sheet. And that fact sheet is available here. It's a brand new fact sheet. And the summary of the fact sheet was presented to the IMO in April to reinforce and continue pushing for good recommendations for county and for eligibility of feedstocks to be considered sustainable fuels. So this fact sheet covers these topics, including land use change and food security. They talk about different citations, including a synthesis paper, finding food availability is either improved or there's no effects from bioenergy projects, especially at household levels in developing countries. Food price impacts are almost all based on modeling rather than empirical evidence. And in general, food production has had bioenergy projects have had a positive effect on food production in the global south. So there's a lot of, I'd say, increasing evidence that bioenergy investments are the same investments that you need to improve food production. And they go together. In fact, they are one and the same in most cases. Most bioenergy is coming from things like corn or soybean or sugarcane, and improving production of those crops increases both bioenergy and food production. It shouldn't be that hard. I don't know why the Europeans can't get it. You know, they think, oh, you can't use this because it's a quote food crop. We have to grow jatropha that no one can eat. Those have been disasters. I can verify those projects have been disasters because you can't eat it. Why do you want someone in some developing country to grow something, and then when the bridge washes out that rainstorm, they can't sell it, they can't even eat it? What are they going to do with it? Why not have a crop that has multiple uses? I never understood. Anyway, they have a lot of, each one of these topics: agriculture, rural infrastructure, energy access, household modernization, soil quality. Each of those, they find positive relationships with bioenergy projects, and they have papers that they cite for each one of these, multiple papers in this fact sheet. We contributed some of the papers. The other thing that was interesting, and this is IAA bioenergy task activity, is that there's really a lot of potential in developing countries still to expand and to get more engaged in bioenergy and biofuels. And this is an opportunity for US technology and I think for US exports as well. Now, unfortunately, as long as there's hunger in the world, there's always going to be someone out there pointing at biofuels and saying, oh, that's the problem. And we're always going to have a challenge. So we need to keep communicating. We need to keep asking that we look at the data. We need to keep questioning some of these model assumptions that are patently false. And we need to show that our projects improve access to credit markets, mechanization, other inputs for agriculture, because the same things that help you develop a bioeconomy for bioenergy help you develop a bioeconomy for food, fiber, lumber, and other services. Extension systems, adoption of precision techniques, better links and infrastructure to get rural areas connected with markets. These are all necessary to develop bioenergy, and they help improve food security. So right now, we're trying to decide where to focus next. At least I am personally in this program that had been the Clean Energy Ministerial Biofuture Platform Initiative. We would like to reorient and reframe to better fit current priorities. And we are thinking of getting a paper published on the topics we just mentioned, and citing some of the same papers that we put together for the fact sheet. We're also considering, there's a bunch of new ISO initiatives. They're starting an international workshop agreement, I think next week, out of the UK, to try to get documentation of the best methods to treat when dealing with biomass as an input for steel or cement or energy for any use when you're doing the carbon accounting. And that could be important. I found that being at the table in those ISO procedures is laborious, frustrating, but if you're not there, things can really go sideways fast. Continue improving that global data set on available biomass, maybe work on this common greenhouse gas intensity labeling system. There's also the idea of setting some targets for biofuel production and maybe announcing that at COP30. That's one of the things some people are talking about. But I thought I'd take advantage of this group, which is not a group that I normally talk to see what you think priorities should be. And that's my last slide. And I can take questions. I think I had a kind of a summary thing about my personal priorities. And then thank you. So thank you. Stefan.
Running just a little bit behind, so maybe one question.
Keith, obviously, you know, we've been on the ILUC debate for a very long time together, since the California low carbon fuel standard development. But the one thing I want to mention is, you know, you mentioned the billion-ton studies and that we have enough biomass available. And I think this is 100% true, but then you're really starting to focus a lot on waste-based biofuels, right? And if you look, for example, at corn and corn stover doesn't come for free either, right? So then in some ways you might as well use corn grain because corn stover protects soil carbon, right? Increases soil carbon, protects the soil, etc. And that's sort of the issues I think we can also easily run into. I mean, I think the Europeans that you mentioned learn a little bit the hard way to rely solely on waste-based biofuels. Now, there's also a UCO issue, but in general, right, they give waste-based biofuels so much credit that now there's a lot of fraud going on in this area. It's hard to certify the supply chains, right? I'm just like cautioning a little bit. There's still other questions that need to be sorted out in this area, in my opinion.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions. I will say that my experience on the farm and the cost savings and benefits of low-till or conservation till or no-till agriculture are pretty well documented. They don't have a big impact necessarily on yield, but they can reduce costs. But you can't do low-till, no-till when you have 300 bushel an acre of corn. You got to get rid of some of that stover, and then you need a market for it. And that's just one example of an opportunity, and we lose in a sense in the accounting game to the Brazilians because they use their equivalent of stover. They use their bagasse from the sugar cane that once they squeeze the sugar out of the cane, they burn that cane. It's already there at the facility anyway, and they burn it in boilers and offset oil in the electric grid and get a huge credit for it. Our biofuel, losing my word. Anyway, refineries are not generally using biomass or renewables, but if they did, they could have a score that would be highly competitive in California, for example, under the low carbon fuel standard. And there might be ways to do that using some of the corn stover. But that's just, and the UCO thing, I think we have way too much reliance on waste, and we could be doing a lot more with what we actually produce. Thanks. So it's time for a break, is that right?
Mike, I think just keep going. So, no, well, let's keep going. We'll take the break after the next panel because we may lose Rick. Yeah.
So next up, we're going to have our panel discussion. We're going to have Rick Gazelle from Toyota Motors. We're have Jimmy Conde from Boyd and Gray, and Salo Zellemeyer from Valero. Rick is going to be joining online. So.
Jimmy might have just stepped out, so we can start with Salo and Rick.
Okay.
Yeah, I was told this was going to be a panel. I mean, what's going on here? So did you want me to just launch into it?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't really have a presentation, but Ernie said make some opening remarks to fill time while Jimmy's in the bathroom and Rick is online. So I'm happy to do that. I mean, I think the first thing to say is we need some implementation of congestion zone pricing at the DC Beltway because DC has a difficult enough time with snow, much less rain. And when you have torrential rain combined with Beltway construction, that led me to miss my morning flight. So I apologize for being late and having Ernie have to rejigger the schedule. Great to be with this group again. And I just want to thank Ernie, thank all the organizers. And I would be remiss if I didn't say on behalf of everybody on the Valero team how deeply felt the loss of our friend Dave Lose is and continues to be. That was a shock to all of us, and I'm really honored that Ernie and team dedicated this conference to him. You know, we've worked together for many years now, trying to, I think Dave was one of the early visionaries of bringing the entire liquid fuels industry together, autos, the feedstock suppliers, and us evil refiners around the same table to talk about mutual issues of concern. And I deeply want to offer our condolences to his family and friends. I know many are in this room, and look forward to toasting to his memory later on today. Transitioning from that to the topics at hand, which I think we're supposed to be discussing, the upcoming efforts to reform some of the regulations that we've all had to tackle the last decade. And of course, Michael, I'm sure, stole just about all of our thunder by jumping ahead of us with his presentation. But I think the most important thing to say is I hope what we're getting from this entire movement, starting with the executive orders that were issued on January 20th, to some of the issues that have arisen in the litigation. I know Michael talked about the issue that's before the Supreme Court, but also just generally what we're seeing across the policy spectrum is a little bit of a return to common sense. I think we had lost our path on a lot of that. And you know, I think the previous speaker spoke to one of the ways where we lost our common sense, which is on the ILUC and ways of distorting you know, the value of some feedstocks versus others, getting away from tech neutrality, getting away from giving more options to consumers, not less, getting away from the realization that energy remains the bedrock of not just economic flourishing, but really the flourishing of Western civilization. I don't think I'm overstating it to say that you really would have difficulty having one without the other. And it remains the greatest pathway to bring the greatest number of people out of poverty around the world. So I'm pleased that with the executive orders that were issued on specifically on energy on January 20th, whether it was the Energy Emergency Declaration or Unleashing American Energy, there was a clear flag being planted by the administration to say, it's time to stop apologizing for energy production. It's time to focus on real world problems. It's time to end the idea that governments can pick winners and losers and force consumers to accept products that don't fit their needs, and that we benefit by having competition in the marketplace. We don't benefit by restricting ourselves to single technology solutions. So I think those principles laid out by the administration, and of course, you know, as we will see over the coming, you know, hopefully second Trump term, will be carried out. We saw Michael discuss the Congressional Review Act resolution that was passed by the Senate, which we hope to see signed by the president shortly, to address the many problems with the application of the California waiver in recent years. And now we hope that that carries through to things like the tailpipe standards and other regulations that, and we can talk in more detail, but I think our view is have distorted the marketplace and gotten away from what the original purpose of the underlying statutes was. So that's my own opening salvo. Jimmy?
Sure. So thanks, Salo. I think the title of this panel is regulatory reform, right? So the question then is sort of why are you trying to reform and what problems are you trying to solve? And I think from the perspective of the Trump administration here, they don't have any particular policy agenda on this. They just want to reduce costs as much as possible, get out of the way as much as possible. And I think if they had any agenda here, it would be, you could summarize it in sort of the President Trump's usual fashion, is just make the VA great again, right? They just want to make American cars great again. And that's the way they're approaching the problem. And so the challenge for them is not going to be what is our goal. the challenge for them is going to be how we achieve that goal in a way that's sustainable and that survives challenges in court, which are going to come fast and furious as soon as these rules are finalized. And that's a huge problem because the court they're going to be likely facing in a lot of these challenges is not going to be friendly. Most of these cases are going to be filed in the DC Circuit. The DC Circuit is not a good court for Trump-style regulatory reform, let's put it that way. And so it's going to be, the challenge for them is going to be, how do we unwind all of this in a way that we can persuade these judges to give us a pass, right? And that's a challenge for them because at least from what we've been hearing, they want to move really quickly and they might not be sort of considering all the things they need to consider. Now, when President Trump was elected, full disclosure here, we wrote a playbook for them that sort of laid out a detailed strategy for unwinding all the different pieces that Michael talked about earlier in his presentation. It's not clear to me that they've read the playbook. So I'm going to tell you first sort of what is happening, sort of the positive story, what are we actually seeing the administration do? And then we can talk about what should happen and what should be happening. So what we know is happening is they're interested in re-exploring on the EPA side, the so-called endangerment finding, right? Everybody in this room has heard about that. It's a pretty big deal. The one thing to know about that is there's no such thing as the endangerment finding. There's a lot of different provisions in the statute called the Clean Air Act, which deal with air pollution that endangers human health or public welfare. And there's one particular provision in the statute that authorizes regulation of motor vehicles that has an endangerment finding requirement. So in 2009, EPA said that essentially 6 greenhouse gases combined endanger human health and public welfare. And the motor vehicles as a class, as a whole, produce enough pollution that it's not de minimis, that it significantly contributes to that problem. And so that EPA should therefore regulate those vehicles, regardless of cost, regardless of whether that would actually meaningfully or cost effectively solve the problem. They're going to do it. So that was upheld in the DC Circuit in a decision that actually has some pretty unfavorable language to anything that the administration would try to do to unwind that. They say essentially that EPA cannot consider policy when it was a good idea in terms of the economics to regulate motor vehicles. And they say that, that the science is very clear on climate change and greenhouse gases endangering public welfare, and that EPA's evidence was overwhelming. So not clear that that pathway is ideal for surviving challenges in that court. Now, it's not clear that they are going to move in that direction, I should say. So far, the only thing we know is that they have a rule that appears to be about, as Michael mentioned, power plants. And there's a different statutory text there that requires a significant contribution. And the argument there is going to be like, well, it might be de minimis enough under 202A, the provision dealing with motor vehicles, but here it requires something more. It has to be significant. And maybe in our judgment, it's such a small part of the problem that this is not really the optimal way of dealing with it. So that might be a different approach to power plants, but not clear to me that that's going to be the approach that they end up going with under 202. So what other options are there? One option that I think we would want to see on that is, as Michael mentioned, the past administration also said that EVs actually don't emit any greenhouse gases, right? And so if that is correct, at least from the tailpipe, which is sort of the statute, at least on its face, is concerned with emissions that come out of the motor vehicles, right? And so maybe what the administration could say is, look, because this type of vehicle, this subset of the class does not contribute to the problem, we're not going to include it when we set the standards, right? So just as in the statute dealing with fuel economy regulations, where the Department of Transportation cannot consider electric vehicles, EPA could say, look, because this subset of vehicles does not endanger human health or public welfare, we're not going to consider it when setting standards. And therefore, they could ramp down the greenhouse gas standard for the remainder of the vehicles, the gasoline light duty vehicles, and align its regulations again with NHTSA, which is, I think, what the autos have been requesting for a long time, right? That is not possible if you include electric vehicles in the class of vehicles regulated, because they simply have no CO2 tailpipe emissions, right? But if you exclude them, then it becomes possible again to realign with the Department of Transportation, and you can have, what we had in 2009, just, assuming with the Trump administration, we'll try to lower that target as much as possible within the realm of what could survive in court. But that could be one alternative approach to just unwinding the endangerment finding in its entirety. So that's the way to go, in my view, at least for EPA. Now on the NHTSA side, things are a lot easier. As I mentioned, the statute just says flat out, you cannot consider electric vehicles. The Department of Transportation violated that prohibition by considering electric vehicles. And just let me give you some data points. So the final rules that they issued, I think, require 65 miles per gallon for passenger cars in 2027. I think it's 2027. And that's premised on 31.4% of all passenger cars being electric by 2027, model year 2027. So that's not going to happen. I think it's pretty fair to say. And it also is inconsistent with the statute. You cannot consider that level of electric vehicles. In fact, you can't consider any electric vehicles when you're setting the standard. So Secretary Duffy has already issued a memorandum saying that they're going to reconsider the CAFE rules issued under the Biden administration. And what's going to happen there is they're going to eliminate electric vehicles out of their modeling. I think that's pretty clear. That's what they're going to be doing. And then they're going to ramp down the standards to what they were approximately in 2022, 2021, before the Biden administration came in, which would be, about 44 miles per gallon for passenger cars instead of 65 miles per gallon. So that's, I think, where we're going to be heading. We're going to see something similar for light duty trucks. Now there's a second part of that Michael touched on, which is you can't consider electric vehicles when setting the standards, right? But you can consider them for purposes of measuring your compliance. And when you're doing averaging, you can include the electric vehicles in your averaging. And the way that the value of electric vehicles is calculated, as Michael mentioned, is through this petroleum equivalency factor. The Biden administration, as Michael also mentioned, had a very generous petroleum equivalency factor that essentially says that the Tesla, for example, has over 500 miles per gallon in sort of equivalent fuel economy. Of course, that is ludicrous. The Department of Energy now has a memorandum recently explaining that they're going to level the playing field, so to speak, by lowering the petroleum equivalency factor down. So regardless of what happens in the litigation, I think we're going to see, at least starting in model year 2027, if not earlier, something that sort of levels the playing field by de-inflating the compliance subsidy for electric vehicles. So that means not just eliminating the 0.15 the multiplier that Michael talked about, the 666% multiplier that Michael talked about, but also eliminating sort of some of the monkey business that DOE did in terms of when calculating the upstream efficiency of electricity. They assumed a very sort of, they assumed basically all solar and wind and nuclear by 2050. And then they sort of extended the compliance calculation throughout the lifetime, expected lifetime of the vehicles, which they thought would be, an average of 15 years or so based on data for internal combustion engines. And they're probably going to unwind all of that and come up with something that's a lot lower in terms of compliance for electric vehicles. And let's see, what else is there? So I think those are the plan A for the Biden administration was EPA. Plan B was CAFE, and then Plan C was, of course, the waivers. So now that's, Plan C is out the window. I would argue, I don't think that California is going to succeed in its purported court challenge. And then the question is, what does California do next, right? So where do they go from here? The statute at least would seem to prohibit anything that's substantially similar to ACC2 in the future from being approved by EPA. So what's next for them? I don't know, but they're considering a lot of different policies. So one possible way they could try to encourage sort of the same industrial policy that tilted in favor of EVs is by monkeying with the low carbon fuel standard, right? And trying to make it favor EVs and not favor other alternative fuels. I think that's probably going to happen. Then already does. It's arguably already happening. It's going to get worse. They're probably going to do other policies that are going to be, more unpopular. You're going to have maybe vehicle miles traveled limits. They're going to try to maybe force consumers to give up their internal combustion cars. Something like that is probably in the cards. As I said, I don't think they have a plan B yet, but they're going to come up with it fairly soon. And then I think the last piece of this that matters, and in terms of what is happening, is the big beautiful bill, the one big beautiful bill that everybody has been hearing about. That's going to really change the landscape in terms of leveling the playing field if they go through with some of the changes that they're thinking about making. So, right, they're going to, at least it seems like they're going to repeal the clean vehicle tax credit. That's a very good tax credit for EVs. They're going to repeal the commercial clean vehicle tax credit. It seems the refueling property tax credit for chargers might be going away. They're gonna change the advanced manufacturing tax credit to make it harder to claim, at least to the extent you have some sort of foreign control. And that's gonna really change incentives. So a lot of the rules I've been talking about are premised on the continuation of these credits through at least 2032. So the entire economic analysis that the Biden administration did for both the light duty vehicle rules and the heavy duty vehicle rules will essentially be no longer sound, because all their modeling, I mean, it was never sound, but it will be more patently unsound because all of their modeling relied on the availability of these tax credits, which is now likely going away. So that's another way the administration can also sort of take advantage of legislation to try to get rid of some of these rules and lower the standards. I think that's it from me.
Thank you, Salo and Jimmy. Rick Gazelle, are you online with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead, Rick.
Hello, everyone. Sorry I can't be there. Apologies. Just some stuff came up and not able to make it, but I appreciate the opportunity. Maybe just jumping, piggybacking on what we've heard so far on the panel, trying to add maybe some auto perspective of kind of what we're hearing. We don't have any direct specific information on what's going to happen, but we are starting to hear, not just within the auto industry, or the OEMs, but maybe the larger auto industry, of kind of what's being pondered in terms of how a program might be structured, how it might work. I think Jimmy covered some of that. Maybe if I can attempt to share my screen, I have one slide that I'd like to see if this works. Let me know if you can see.
Yeah,
Can you see it? Oh, wait, here's the share button. It says I'm sharing.
yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Any questions during this, just please feel free and stop and let me know. I think that the direction that we're anticipating is a, you know, ICE driven CAFE greenhouse gas standard, and that it will likely be DOT/NHTSA leading stringency via the CAFE program. And building on a little bit what was said already, we're aware of a direct final rule that's being that's out for interagency review that we
Can we
expect.
interrupt for 1 minute? Could you adjust the screen so it's slideshow?
Oh,
Bigger.
sorry, I meant to do that. Let's see. Come on. How about that?
Perfect. There you go.
All right, sorry about that. As I said, we're expecting there to be a direct final rule that reiterates EVs being prohibited from CAFE standard setting. Not sure why that's necessary. It kind of harkens back to Trump 1, where they had SAFE 1 that explained preemption. I don't think you need a regulation to re-explain what's in the statute. But at any rate, we're expecting that. As Jimmy, as you mentioned, others probably have mentioned when I wasn't on in the meeting, that DOE is expected to further adjust the PEF to reduce the CAFE compliance benefit of EVs. And that could, we're even hearing from some quarters that, you know, in their meetings with the administration, that there might be some attempt to just eliminate EVs from the compliance side of the CAFE program, which would be kind of like the Biden administration saying that EVs could be included in the standard setting. So, you know, one administration's egregious moves can lead to another's. We believe that, you know, EPA is going to end up having to align with the CAFE program, but how that will happen is not completely clear yet. And it seems that, you know, at one end of the spectrum, you have a reevaluation, revisiting of endangerment at very high level. And then within that, you start looking at other program options that increasingly, as you see that error, become kind of more disruptive to you know, the 15 years of greenhouse gas program. And starting at the left, you know, that would be, I would say, more reflective of kind of the industry starting point, that left-hand box there, including EVs, but adjusting the stringency for market reality, and the market reality due to infrastructure, battery supply chain, all of that. And that when you start thinking of it that way, kind of a strong hybrid becomes a balancing point. But if you want to sell EVs, you can sell them, and maybe you have more ICE. So that's kind of flexibility for compliance pathways for OEMs, and it also is more likely to provide consumer choice. You know, I know that there's a lot of rhetoric around, and you know, Toyota, for one, we believe consumers should have choice. There should be multiple paths. That's our technology strategy. But obviating or prohibiting certain technologies, you know, it starts to create other issues, and it really goes towards the longevity of the program and how well it's going to be a future administration proof. Jimmy, I think you spoke to some of that about expected lawsuits. That goes beyond lawsuits. It goes beyond the next administration just flipping the switch and going back to where it was before. And, you know, that makes for very difficult planning for manufacturers when the pendulum keeps swinging wildly from one extreme to the other. Moving towards kind of more extreme adjustments would be outright excluding EVs, both in compliance and standard setting. Excuse me, yes, in the compliance benefit of EVs and the standard setting. And this would be one step further than the CAFE program, where you can have EVs for compliance, but you can't use them in setting the stringency of the standards. So in this case, you're really talking about an ICE-based stringency level. You need to then talk about, okay, what do we mean by an ICE? It certainly wouldn't be hybrid level, because then you're kind of creating a hybrid mandate. So that becomes a big question. And it's not really sure how this pool of EVs would be regulated. If they're out of the fleet, are they just assumed not regulated under 202, or are they another fleet that has an efficiency requirement around it, battery efficiency? So these are things that we don't know yet, but this is kind of where the murky discussions, we're trying to start to categorize things. And at the furthest extreme, we've heard even a move to single vehicle standards. So really like a not to exceed standard that would be based on ICEs. And, at that point, you're talking about that is a complete kind of least stringent standard that could be set, because if you're going to set a not to exceed, it has to capture kind of the worst performer and allow that to whatever is deemed as a legitimate worst performer. And so by default, that means, you're pretty much obviating the need for EVs. So you have one approach, which is at a higher policy level through endangerment, which might obviate EVs. And here would be a regulatory approach to do the same. And so, I guess the final thoughts here is that these are just things that we're hearing, and some of the options that are being pondered. There may be others that we're unaware of, but it really raises a lot of questions that we need more information on. And as far as what's the starting model year, what is the appropriate stringency for a conventional ICE, the impact on OEM existing technology strategies and investments, and are we really addressing consumer choice here? Are we in some respects, you want to have regulations that have a level playing field, but a level playing field also means allowing investments that have been made to the part of the market that really wants them, for that to be available. But in some respects, if regulations are too extreme, you can stifle that investment. You can stifle being able to have a reason to provide those technologies to consumers. So it's a double-edged sword. It needs to be considered. And the other thing that doesn't seem to be getting much bandwidth right now are the Tier 4 criteria pollutants, which in some respects have more of a timing issue than the greenhouse gas standards. And I don't think that the administration completely understands that the Tier 4 INMOG plus NOx, for example, was a backdoor driver of EVs. So all of the above is still really murky. We're starting to have kind of some fuzzy outlines that you can see here. But I think that it's a situation we need to be careful. And I think there's some ideas coming out of the administration that they want to devise a program that would be future-proof. And I'm just not seeing how, under the current circumstances, unless you think you're going to win some lawsuits that go to the Supreme Court, how any of this is future-proof. And so I think, the auto industry is, not this big monolith. I think there's different elements, and I think we want to be able to respect a multitude of strategies and markets. And it doesn't seem that, right now that is particularly resonating. So I will stop there and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Salo, Jimmy, and Rick. We've got about 20 minutes, and I think we really want to open this up now. So I see a couple of hands. I'm going to go to Chris and then back to you.
Hey, Ernie, I'm sorry. Logistically, you want me to stop sharing?
Say again, Rick?
Just a logistics question. Should I stop sharing my screen now?
Yeah, why, that's fine. You can leave it up. It doesn't matter. It's helpful.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. Sort of following Rick and Jimmy, Salo too, certainly. From a fuel side, and Rick, obviously there are probably more questions than answers, but I think what may be on a lot of our minds, does this present an opportunity to talk about a fuel? If we're back to largely ICE engines, let's call it a more flexible standard, but yet there still would be a standard, a NHTSA standard probably. Is this an opportunity to go back to some of the things we've talked about in the past on octane and performance and, meeting higher mileage standards, but not necessarily tied to greenhouse gas standards, although we certainly benefit from an ethanol side?
I mean, my opinion, yes, but with a caveat that, we long argued with, especially EPA, that conventional ICEs were backing up against, the limits of efficiency. And you can still eke more out, but you start diminishing returns start to accelerate. And there is a need to move to certain forms of electrification, not nearly at the pace of the Biden administration or the assumptions that those standards were based upon, which, none of them were very realistic. But the fact of the matter is that there is a move in that direction. We do need to think globally, and global competition that exists. So there needs to be a room for all of the above, as I said, and we believe that fuels play a role. And I would say, Chris, that Toyota is probably maybe, further out there on that particular issue than the rest of the autos. So I can't speak. I know that we have very good conversations. And when we talk about the fuel side, one of the issues that we worry about is how can we get these standards revised as quickly as possible? And as you move from the left to the right on the screen that we still have up here, or that you start to introduce major fuel changes or compliance aspects that involve fuel, such as well-to-wheel, that starts to take more time. You have a greater undertaking, and the one thing that we want to avoid is a repeat of the Trump 1 administration, where we just ran out of time on certain things, and it just reverted back to the existing because we ran out of time. And there's concerns that if efforts and energy is spent on things like endangerment, we're not going to get the standards that we need. And so I think fuels should and could be a part of this, but the timing aspect might need to be considered. But I think from a messaging standpoint, I think it makes perfect sense. And I will just go down one slide, and I won't get into this. I think you've seen this from me in other slides, not this one, where, we see on the greenhouse gas side, similar to the PEF on the CAFE side, we see a well-to-wheel type of assessment or accounting process, providing that more accurate assessment of the true performance of vehicles, including, electrification and liquid fuels. And so, on the right-hand side just shows how the apparent benefit of EVs shrinks when you move to a well-to-wheel accounting. And, this is something that we certainly believe in, we Toyota. I think intellectually, our competitors also can appreciate this, but there are questions about how do you trust EPA in setting standards that acknowledges this and not coming back and using this against us somehow? How do we avoid ending up having to be responsible possibly for the liquid fuels responsibility if that's not met? And just as I said before, the timing aspect. So I'll stop there, but I think that's an excellent question. I think that it can, from a messaging standpoint, it can be, okay, if we're at ICEs, let's maximize emissions reductions and be able to do that through lowering the carbon intensity of fuels.
Yeah. Hi, this is Stefan Mueller, University of Illinois.
It's okay. I just wanted to say, we certainly see the opportunities there for biofuels. Again, a lot of questions unanswered about how this is all going to play out in the proposed regulations and once they go final, but certainly we believe this is a long overdue rebalancing, as some of what Rick just laid out in this slide here that we're looking at, between the artificial compliance benefits that were received by EVs versus the actual well-to-wheel life cycle analysis, weighed down further by what our last speaker pointed to as the unfair ILUC diminishment of the contributions of biofuels to emission levels. So, I think there's opportunities within these rules to rebalance. I mean, I guess I would just caution, to me, ethanol, for example, has earned its place as a commercially viable product outside of it being forced, quote unquote, onto consumers, partially because of the octane benefits and the cost benefits for us refiners by needing it. If we're talking about EVs now in the same context as saying we need EVs to be part of a rule because otherwise EVs won't be available for consumer choice, I think that's a problem. I think EVs should be able to stand on their own if consumers want them. If there's global competition, fine, like consumers should be able to purchase them. But I don't think we should be artificially using what we all know are rules and statutes that were not designed, let's face it, with globalized pollutants in mind to force a technology shift. That's what we've been trying the last decade. I think we're seeing the results of that now. We're trying to correct for that. So I wouldn't want to see us, backsliding on that basis.
If there's not another question, I apologize for not being able to quote unquote read the room. If there's not another question, I would like to respond to that and maybe ask a question. And that would be, well, if you just had the current structure of a greenhouse gas program, instead of saying that, by 2032, there's going to be 70% EVs in the fleet, what if you looked at where it is today and made a reasonable projection and say by 2032, you could, I'm just making this up, you could count on 20% EVs in the fleet. I don't think that's going to harm liquid fuels. And if on top of that, you had a well-to-wheel accounting, I think you'd have a similar situation to what you would have in the CAFE program with a revised PEF and allowing, certainly allowing EVs to on the compliance side, but even allowing EVs in the standard setting side. I think from an OEM perspective, we don't see that as technology forcing, quite frankly. It reflects the market that's going to happen today. And if people are worried about who's buying what technologies, depending on what you're selling, I think that that's something that it's where we think it's going anyway, we don't see that a problem with modeling reflecting that. It's where you start to come up with artificial assumption upon artificial assumption to get to a incredibly unrealistically stringent target.
I think Stefan had a question.
Yeah, I just had a question. So it speaks probably a little bit to what Chris said, but I see very little here mentioning of FFVs or E85 vehicles. I think since sort of we last looked a lot into E85 vehicles, the science also has moved on, right? The GREET model now shows much lower life cycle emissions for E85 vehicles because of the efficiency improvements, but also now the 45Z reduced ILUC value. Right, and we also learned a lot more about aromatic substitutions with ethanol, right? And so, why are FFVs or E85 or even E85 hybrids not considered? It seems to be that this could be a technology a lot of people could care less around.
I mean, from our perspective, I don't think it's not considered. I think it's just, these are details, like I mentioned, that within the regulatory process that the administration is going to go through, they should, look at increased opportunities for compliance with the standards through biofuels. So I don't think we would disagree with that.
There's a question. So I want to get to your question.
Yeah, my question is, does this group have a strategy to work with others to promote, for example, these regulations are under review. We know they're going to change. How do we get the well-to-wheel, for example, approach incorporated? What's the strategy? What in practical terms?
I was going to talk about that actually.
Perfect. Thanks,
For the
Jimmy.
question. So one of the problems that we have here is that we're operating, at least EPA is operating under the Clean Air Act, right? Which was enacted in 1970 to deal with smog and pollution from motor vehicles. It talks about, it uses the word from, right? And so our friends at Tesla and also at the Auto Alliance, to be frank, have said, well, you cannot consider upstream emissions, right? You have to consider only pollutants that come from the vehicle, right? So under the Clean Air Act, at least there's a colorable argument that you can't even take this into account, which means that if that's true, the legal premise is true, the regulations are necessarily going to be biased in favor of vehicles that shift their pollution upstream to the power sector, right? So then what do we have instead? Actually, before the Supreme Court made up the idea that the Clean Air Act covered greenhouse gases, which it doesn't, to be frank, we had a whole statutory scheme called CAFE that deals with this, and it actually has upstream, considerations for electric vehicles. You can, in fact, the Secretary of Energy has to take into account compare the upstream efficiency of petroleum to the upstream efficiency of electricity. So we already have a scheme that deals with this problem to an extent. It's not an ideal scheme. I know our friends, the automakers, don't like the scheme. They rather sort of EPA invent something new through the Clean Air Act. But if you want something durable that's actually written into law that already takes into account upstream efficiency, that's the tool we have on the books right now. Yeah.
And I wanted to first recognize and appreciate the caliber of this conversation. It's great to be able to get together at this time and hear such sophisticated thinking on this. And pick up on Stefan's point on the flex fuel vehicles in E85. And while that's certainly not central to the discussion here, I think we've got an opportunity where if what we're talking about is essentially the CAFE rule becoming the rule through some of these various routes, we're now at about 10 to 15% is what I've typically heard in terms of the value of FFVs from an MPG standpoint, rough case and certainly cannot document that, but that's what I understand on that CAFE rule. And we have seen persistence in some FFV models. So I think if we got rid of the greenhouse gas rule problem in terms of the double standard there and the program that doesn't recognize FFV manufacturing, we could see that come back and could see that E85 opportunity really open up out there, and very consistent also with the strategy of giving consumers choice and having a diversity of solutions out there.
One last question.
This is Dean Drake. Rick presented, well, all of the presenters presented some very interesting information. So I just wanted to throw in something that I'm working on that fits right in here. And that is how the electric vehicle, all electric vehicles are part of what I call a third generation vehicle, a new architecture for building cars. But not all third generation vehicles are entirely electric vehicles. So in between, you have things like the Ram Charger that is a electrically driven, but hybrid electric vehicle, the extended range electric vehicle. You have potentially coming down the road
potentially fuel cells involved in it. But you have to take into account all of those sorts of things when you start looking at these regulations, because EVs, I think, are becoming essentially the default vehicle. If you look at all these regulatory programs, electric vehicles are your get out of jail free card. So the more you ramp down on the ICE standards and the less expensive Gen 3 vehicles get to be built, that's going to drive auto manufacturers to considering a big role for the EV, because all of the Gen 3 vehicles are partial EVs anyway. So in thinking about this, I just wanted to add the idea that you can't rule EVs out. Even if you take away the incentives, the subsidies and everything else, because there's going to be a point in time with the evolution of automotive technology that EVs may be the easiest, lowest cost solution to providing more personal transportation mobility. And a lot of these things look like they might actually be pro EV, even though at first blush it doesn't look like it. Because I think of the saying that goes that whether the pitcher hits the stone or the stone hits the pitcher, it's going to be bad for the pitcher. And with EVs as a get out of jail free card, I wouldn't rule them out in your calculations. And if you want to keep ethanol as part of that, you've got to understand how this technology is going to be rolling out.
Okay. I'd like to thank again Salo, Jimmy, and Rick. Excellent discussion. We're going to take a 10-minute break and we'll be back here in 4:20. We'll talk to your program, be up next.
You to take your seats again. We're going to jump in.
All right, everybody, welcome back from the break. You
And
could
for
take your
those of you
seats.
in section 1, if you're having trouble seeing and would like to move down, you're more than welcome to move to section 4 and 5. Just don't go in the upper bleachers.
All right, thank you, everybody. Welcome back from the break. Next up, we have Bill Stadinsky and Veronica Riley from the Top Tier program. Veronica currently works at GM, and Bill is retired from GM and works for the Top Tier programs.
Yes, Center for Quality Assurance.
Yeah. Okay, Center for Quality Assurance, CQA. So thanks, Bill.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Appreciate the invitation to come and update you on the Top Tier program, the fuel program. Chris asked, how does fuels fit into this? So it's a nice segue into what we're doing here. So we put this together. Veronica Riley is the lead program engineer at General Motors. Shailesh Lopez, who's sitting in the back there, he's the lead diesel engineer. And I'm the lead program administrator. So the CQA group, who I work for, is contracted to GM in order to help run the program. We take all of our guidance, all of our direction from General Motors, and they work collaboratively with the OEMs, all the other auto OEMs, which you'll see here in a second. So that's how we all fit together. Okay, so what is Top Tier? I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the program, but it's a trademark fuel program created to voluntarily, that's a big important word there, increase fuel detergency and cleanliness of fuels without mandatory regulation changes. In 2004, a group of engineers at GM, some of you may remember Bob Fury, Andy Paczynski, Coleman Jones, myself, and some others sat around and we said, hey, what could we do to incentivize the fuels that we want to see in our vehicles? We know what fuel qualities keep our vehicles clean. How could we incentivize that? And what we did is we came up with a performance standard that defines all of the different engine tests that a fuel marketer could run, and then they show us their data, and then we, as the OEM group, would take a look at it and approve that data, approve that fuel formulation. So that's the genesis of the program. That started in 2004 for the gasoline side, and then in 2017, Shailesh and Rebecca Monroe wrote the diesel standard that came out as well. These companies you see here are the current automotive sponsors. Okay, we work collaboratively. We meet with them periodically. We review our plans. They give us guidance on the direction of the program. However, General Motors owns the trademark. They register the trademark in all the different countries. They make sure that we're defending the trademark if we need to. And there are contracts, legal agreements between the fuel marketers that voluntarily want to join the program and General Motors. So those are the legal binding contracts. CQA helps them with the administration. And I just want to point out that ultimately we wanted to give consumers confidence for knowing what's the right fuel as far as detergency and cleanliness goes for their vehicle. And that's why GM, before they even got started, they went out to the other OEMs, a handful of OEMs, and said, hey, Toyota, hey, BMW, hey, Honda, how would you feel about doing this program with us? Okay, so that's a little bit of the history. So why do we need Top Tier? Okay, so in a very broad sense, we set a higher quality fuel detergency and cleanliness requirements to a known standard for greater customer satisfaction. Okay, that's very good. It defines sort of the vision of the program. What we wanted to do in terms of marketing and defining the fuel requirements, we had 3 pillars where we say we want to make sure that the standard helps protect your engine. We want to make sure that it gives us optimal performance over the life of the vehicle. And we want to make sure that if you're using non-top tier fuels that may give you more deposits, that when you start using top tier, you restore some of that performance. And we hear this all the time from customers that call in and talk to us about the program. So those are our guideposts. More specifically, here's an example of why you need top tier. So, and I promise I won't be heavy on the commercial side of this. I'll get to the technical parts of it. But these 2 fuels were chosen out of the San Antonio market last May. We ran one of our engine tests called Port Fuel Injected Intake Valve Deposit Test. It's an ASTM engine test. It's 100 hours long. You run this test, you burn 150 gallons-ish of fuel, and you weigh the valves beforehand and after you run the 100 hours, and you measure the deposit weights. And this first fuel gave 745 milligrams on average per valve in just 100 hours of commercial fuel called LAC, defined by the EPA, okay? It's legal fuel, name brand. Then you have a second fuel that was chosen, same area, and it gave even worse results, 866. By contrast, if you're getting top tier fuel that's run in the same engine test, you need to be below 50 milligrams per valve. And this is what the AAA, the Auto Club, picked up on. They're like, we want to run an independent study on your top tier program. And they ran LAC side by side with top tier, several different varieties. We were nervous as heck as how it was all going to come out. And when they ran it, they said, yeah, okay, it's 19 times cleaner than the LAC fuel and so on. So once that came out, it was like, oh, there's a third party independent agreements with our program, so that we all felt very good about that. So some other key attributes: it's data driven, started by engineers, grassroots. It requires the additive companies to send their formulations to a third party ISO independent test lab to get their data, whether it's engine data or chemistry data. We do annual random audits to make sure that the fuel at least has the right amount of detergent in it, as we select the top tier programs throughout the Western Hemisphere. Top tier is predominantly in the Western Hemisphere right now. We do have plans to go to the Eastern Hemisphere soon, but it's growing quite a bit down in Latin America. Additization to a defined performance standard. That's important for engineers, right? So we want to make sure that we prevent under additization and we prevent over additization. Under additization is that LAC that I talked about earlier, right? It's not enough there, not enough detergent there to clean out the deposits. The over additization, these are high molecular weight molecules in gasoline, orders of magnitude heavier than any of the heaviest gasoline molecules. They're only in there in a couple hundred ppm, but you want to make sure you don't put too much in there because you get unintended consequences. This is key to the refiners, Valero and other refiners. There's no reformulation from the refinery of the base fuel. It is simply additization, and then on the diesel side, you have enhanced filtration for keeping water and sediment under control. So those are the standards in a nutshell. There's a website you can go to. That website, you can download the standards, read them. They're pretty lengthy. We work pretty hard on keeping them up to speed. So starting this January, Veronica worked with the whole team and got the new standards updated so that they now include not only port fuel injected engine tests, but GDI, or gasoline direct injected high efficiency engine tests, okay? So now the standards cover all ICE engines in the marketplace, from lawnmowers all the way up to hybrids with high efficiency and so on. Okay, so those are out there on the website. We've been working with the industry for over 2 years trying to get ready for this launch. And so the additive companies had candidate additives, and once we finalized the standards, then they could run their certification data. So they're already, each of the major additive companies has a couple different formulations that meet our standard right now. We've given everybody 2 years of transition window. We would like to obsolete the old standard and bring in and just have the one standard for ease of customer awareness and so on. We've got new logos, Top Tier Plus, both gasoline and diesel, and the status report is it's going pretty well. The fuel marketers are calling us, the existing ones and new ones. The additive companies are doing what they're supposed to. Pipeline companies are saying, okay, tell us about this transition. How do we do this? We've got so many customers and so on. But in general, everybody's working towards that January 2027 to put in the new standards. Just graphically, and you'll have these slides so you can look at these later at your convenience. But we have the old traditional standard, the base level here. It was predominantly PFI centric. There was also some valve sticking tests in there for some issues with additives at cold temperatures. And there's a prohibition on using organic, organometallic additives for octane enhancement, right? We'd prefer ethanol over lead, manganese, iron and things like that. And then we want the fuel marketers to post this at the point of sale. That's something we're trying to work on. We're trying to convince them it's in their best interest. So you don't always see the decals on the pumps, even though if you go to the website and you see it, the brand on the website, and it says that brand is top tier, and you don't see the decal on the pump, don't worry, it's top tier. It's just that they don't, some of the service stations don't always put the labels on the pump. Or some brands don't do it either, as a matter of just routine. So the new standard, the Plus, is everything the old standard was, except now it's got 3 new tests. It's a direct injected fuel injector cleanup test. It's a stochastic pre-ignition. It's a combustion test. I'll talk to you about it in a second. And there's a particulate matter no harm test. We want to make sure, since these are high molecular weight additives, that we don't have unintended consequences of increasing the soot or particulate from the additive. Just very briefly, I'll clear this slide. This is the fuel injector slide, fuel injector cleanup test, the GDI test. This is the output of your engine control module when you have a brand new fresh set of injectors in the engine. And then what happens is you start to run the engine. It's 120 hours down here. So half of the test, the first half is run without any detergent in it. And so this is a known dirty up fuel. So as the injector starts to plug, the fuel trim value goes, oh, I need to stay open a little bit longer to make sure that that stoichiometry and the oxygen sensor are happy. And so it just ramps up the fuel trim value, and you monitor that. You get to 60 hours and you say, okay, I was dirtied up by 7.8%. And then, okay, let's put the additive in now and do an A/B comparison. And it's the exact same dirty reference fuel. And now with the additive in it, you see it starts to walk it back down. And ideally it'd go back to 0. But the standard that we set up said we want to have restoration as a key marketing aspect. And so we set the standard of, we need you to be at least 50% or greater cleanup compared to a lower quality fuel. And that's the GDI injector test. During that same test, during those 120 hours, you have your particulate matter or your soot meter on, and you go from a clean injector where the soot is low, and then you start to use the dirty up fuel, it increases, and then you get some kind of a stabilized value here during the first 60 hours. You put the additive in. What we want to see is this drop down back to a very low number, or at least get no worse. And so our standard covers we do not want you to get worse than the baseline that was established over here. And then here's the most complicated of our tests. This is stochastic preignition. Stochastic preignition, Elena could get up here and talk to us for hours about, or Tom could get up here and talk to us for hours about the damaging effects of stochastic preignition. And so we have to make sure we're not contributing to it. And these are heavy, non-volatile molecules, right? We're putting in, not very much, but we are putting them in. So what we do, we have an engine set up. It runs a very defined set of conditions. We measure a base fuel, a known fuel, a known oil composition, and we measure that baseline stochastic preignition frequency. Okay, so we actually induce the engine to give you this problematic amount. And we do that, and then we put the additive in next. And then we compare in a paired version. We do base, additive, base, additive, base, additive. And then we do a paired t-test. And we look at, did the additive cause any statistically significant increase? That would be bad. That would fail your additive. If it's neutral, meaning there's not statistically equivalent, or if there's a statistically equivalent or statistically significant decrease, that's a good thing. We want that, and so on. So that's the third test. It's an engine test. It's complicated, expensive, and the additive companies are running them. I'm switching gears now to the diesel program. The diesel program is laid out very similarly to the gasoline program. We know that we need some additives to help with the optimal power and performance over the useful life of the engine. These are very expensive fuel injectors and fuel systems that we need to maintain and keep them clean. Emission standards are driving most of these changes, and we know fuel quality is critical to the performance of the vehicle. If you look at this, the way this is set up, we will have, beyond those 2 years I talked about for gasoline, in the future, we will always have a base detergent diesel, top tier diesel, and we will have a plus. The reason for that is the base covers detergency. These are 2 engine tests over here for injector deposits, internal and external injectors. So we have detergency, and then we have better filtration to keep sediment and water out of the fuel. That's the base level of detergent quality. Then we have a plus standard that says do all that, but we also want to see oxidation stability improvement for some problematic formulations and lubricity improvement. If you've got very high levels of renewable diesel, you don't have to worry about the stability. If you've got high levels of biodiesel fame, you don't have to worry about the lubricity. So the standard has all of that in there. So it's not all about just additives. Okay, switching subjects again. We're going from engineering to marketing here. So we're trying to grow consumer awareness. We know for 20 years, we thought that the fuel marketers would say, yeah, this is top tier, we're marketing and so on. And we said, you know what, about 2 years ago, Veronica and I said, we need to take money out of engineering and start doing digital marketing. And so we've really made an effort to raise consumer awareness throughout the Western Hemisphere. So I talked about the AAA study at the beginning. That's out there on the web over here. It's in the owner's manuals of all of our vehicles. We've started digital marketing campaigns, sending tens of millions of video impressions out to everyone. And we're finding that consumers are really interacting, engaging with these ads and the social media platforms in a much higher rate. They're very curious about what's the right fuel for their vehicle. Vehicles are not cheap, and they want to make sure they're putting the best stuff in there. Top tier station finder. We've got a new mobile app we launched. It's growing. We just started in October. It's growing. We're doing social media posts online. You can go to our top tier website and see some of that. Fuel marketer brands. We're re-emphasizing the need to do the labeling, especially as we get more varieties of top tier into the marketplace, and then we do trade shows. I'll show you this real quick video. I think I will. I don't know how to launch it from here. Do you know how to launch it from your end? You have to click on the black screen.
Finding your favorite high-quality, top-tier approved fuel brands has just got easier. We now have an app you can easily download from the App Store or Google Play. Simply download the app and find a top-tier station near you or as part of your journey planning. use with or without registration. Easy search by location. Stations viewable by list or map. Can filter by distance, favorites, brand, or amenities. Your gasoline should meet the performance requirements of today's vehicles. Continued use of top-tier approved gasoline helps maintain critical fuel economy and cleans damaging engine deposits after just a few tanks. Download the app today and ensure your vehicle gets the fuel it deserves. Available on the App Store and Google Play.
So it's handy. It looks a lot like Google Maps. It works like Google Maps in that it gets you to where you want to go. It will include pricing and a bunch of amenities for work. Oh, don't do that. All right. Okay. So now I'm switching gears on you the last time. So this is something new. The prior program was all about detergency and fuel cleanliness. We are wondering if we should take and leverage the top tier brand now and launch something called top tier eco, or the concept of top tier eco. What we're thinking about for both gasoline and diesel is creating an incentive program so that those that want to have lower carbon intensity fuels in the marketplace, they get rewarded for that. And we could say, hey, you're top tier eco, whatever. We don't have the naming convention pulled up for it yet. But essentially, we would create a tiered incentive program for lower carbon intensity fuels that maybe had different levels. We heard from Keith that scorecard, greenhouse gas emissions scorecard, had all these different levels to it and so on. That's the concept. We would have something that would establish, we'd use the GREET model, the Argonne's GREET model. It would establish a baseline of carbon intensity for the average US E10 gasoline on corn ethanol, something like that, or diesel, whatever the analogous diesel one would be for diesel number 2. And you would then use GREET, the fuel marketer would send us their data using the GREET model and say, okay, our fuel, our E15 fuel that's in the market or our blender pump fuel is in a market it's not a 91 milligrams anymore. It's 78 or whatever it is. And we would have different tiers of incentives, and they would be able to put a label on their pump. Top tier eco, gold, silver, platinum, whatever the right way to do this is, and so on. And we would like to incentivize the use of better sustainable fuels. So that's the concept. The motivation from this came from the General Motors executives that want to continue to promote sustainability. Okay. We're starting to talk to the other OEM sponsors about this. What do you think? Is this the right time our timing on this could be a disaster and all that. So we need your feedback. But in general, we want to start treating vehicles and fuels like a system, like we always talked about, right? We know the vehicles are advancing their hybrid technology, becoming more and more efficient. The fuel should do that too on the carbon scale. There's a lot of other good properties of the fuels. It addresses automotive scope 3 and fuel marketer scope 1 greenhouse gas emissions. They would be able to use this approval process as a verification that they're moving in the right direction. We would use GREET. Fuels are already in the marketplace. We have a bunch of fuels that could already apply and get approval once they did all the GREET programming. We've heard from people in the ethanol industry, of course, that were saying, well, we're at corn. We'd like to use the fiber, or we'd like to go get more advanced and so on, but what's the payback and so on. So we're hoping to create some of that incentive. And of course, renewable diesel and biodiesel throughout the western part of the US, Europe, Thailand, wherever. It does fit with the family of top tier, better fuel standards. It's not detergency. We may not call it top tier eco. We might call it something else eco, but that's the idea, is to leverage what we've learned from the top tier program. That's it. That's all I've got. I just wanted to give you a quick update on what's going on with top tier. It's changing quite a bit. Veronica and Shailesh keep me busy in my retirement to keep making these changes. And I'd appreciate any comments you had especially about the top tier eco.
Questions? While you're thinking, I was really impressed with this new dimension of the top tier program. I think we all are trying to make better quality fuel, thinking about multiple dimensions. Are there any other parameters that you're thinking about to recognize a higher quality fuel besides the cleanliness and the lower carbon? Because there are some other
Yeah, there are certainly
advantages.
other attributes of the fuel that you could start setting standards up for, but we weren't venturing down those roads just yet. We're gonna let octane and legislation hopefully take care of that one. We tried quite hard at ASTM to get that changed. Criteria emissions was something that one of the OEM said, hey, we can set up voluntary criteria emissions levels, and you can go ahead and send us your data and we would evaluate it and so on. But I think that's probably a bridge too far. I think we pretty much are going to stick with carbon intensity.
A bridge too far for implementation, but discussion you'd be open to.
Yeah, talk to your favorite OEM and encourage them that you want to go down that route, and that's the way to do it.
We'll have some conversations during the reception, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments?
So this would actually be a top tier plus eco going forward,
Well, that's the
probably,
problem.
or
It gets wickedly complicated for the consumer. And so if we tried to leverage that, it would be brutal. So it would be a program sponsored by Top Tier. Maybe it's eco brought to you by Top Tier or something like that. I'm not sure yet.
but in the future, top tier is going to be top tier plus regardless, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what about top tier plus plus?
Trying to avoid that.
Okay. Okay. Just an idea. We could talk more later.
Squared.
Just a quick question. I mean, I don't know how sophisticated you want to be with this, but you would basically then have a value for E10 reductions, greenhouse gas reductions with E10 or with E15, right? The standard GREET value. You wouldn't track the ethanol at any particular gas station.
No.
Back to a specific ethanol plant that might have a particularly low.
If
GHG
that
profile.
fuel marketer or fuel retailer had a dedicated source of ethanol from an advanced fiber, corn, whatever, then they could use our scale to apply for a better scoring.
Okay.
Yeah. But
There's
with
an
the
option,
fungible
though,
fuel system, it's challenging. So I think we would start with E15, just incentivize making sure that E15 and blender pumps and E85 stations could somehow easily get approved.
Okay.
Thanks. I guess kind of along that vein, who is your ideal candidate for the eco program? Like how vertically integrated should that marketer, retailer kind of be to maybe jump in and help you get it going?
Retailers so you have fleets, if you're doing renewable diesel or bio, you have fleets, and then you've got retailers. And for the retailers, those with the most dedicated and segregated renewable fuel streams would probably be the easiest to do the accounting on. If they were a completely horizontally integrated retailer, they're going to have to work hard to convince us with the GREET model that they've covered all their bases, because we want to make sure that if we go to, there's maybe 8,000 stations in some of these, bigger ones, 10,000 stations and so on. If our customers are going to those stations, there has to be pretty high certainty that they're going to get the fuel that matches the score. Yeah.
Okay, one more.
No, thanks.
How widely available is top tier fuel? I just pulled up the website and tried to search for stations and typed in Washington, DC, and nothing popped up. So I'm not sure if that's a problem with the app or.
Yeah, that surprises me.
Yeah,
because it's all, you have Shell, Exxon Mobil, Costco, you have all those in the DC area, don't you?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so there's something going on with the
Okay.
app on that case. But yeah, it's in 110,000 stations in the Western Hemisphere.
Okay.
It's 70 to 80 billion gallons of fuel that it represents out of the 125 billion. You should be able to find, at least on the gasoline side, it to be readily available. Yeah.
Can I ask one? Oh.
Yeah, the first phase rolled out in October for the app. So obviously there's some issues that have been happening, but we'll look into that. But phase 2 should be coming and hopefully fix these issues. Okay, so.
Great. My site had only 3 stars, so I'm sure we can do better.
Well, just go ahead and add your 5-star. Don't pay attention, it didn't come up.
One more question, if I can. You mentioned that there are differences in terms of the deposits, right, between LIC and top tier.
Yeah.
Has there been any study on how that actually affects performance in vehicles, how that difference affects performance in vehicles, like fuel economy or drivability? Or
Correct.
Yeah.
There are lots and lots of SAE technical papers on the benefits of a clean engine. What we don't have is this sort of holistic study that's been done, like the auto oil program was done back in the day and so on. So we are leaning on the Coordinating Research Council to do this clean versus dirty effects on emissions and fuel economy and so on. We will see if if we're successful or not. Yeah.
Just, Bill, a quick question. We were talking earlier, but if I'm Chris Blally, fuel retailer, and I have 100 locations and I decide to start selling E15 today, before we even go to top tier eco, and I'm a top tier retailer, I can still call my gasoline top tier even at E15, right? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Top tier goes up to E15 in its coverage, I guess. Yeah, we'd like to do something in Brazil to higher ethanol blend levels, which would then cover blender pumps and so on in the Midwest. That's something that's on our radar as well.
Got it. Thanks.
For detergent seed. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And then, thanks, Bill. And that was a good segue into CRC. And Elena Chapman is going to talk about CRC, the Coordinating Research Council, if you're not familiar, and their Sustainable Mobility Committee. Thank you, Elena.
Okay, can you hear me okay? All right, well, so I know we're right up against 5 o'clock and I'm looking at the schedule and I know everybody wants to get to the networking reception. So I had only prepared about 100 slides today, but I'll make sure that I breeze through them. Bill knows me, he's taught me well. So actually I only had about 17 or 18 slides and I think when they pull up the presentation, I'll be moving through them quickly. Is there a clicker? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about the Coordinating Research Council in an overview, but I'm going to be focusing mostly on talking about the Sustainable Mobility Committee. And our executive director is Chris Tennant, and I am right now one of the committee co-chairs. And I did want to mention, just as a segue from top tier to CRC. So some of the studies Bill has mentioned were actually performed for top tier within CRC. And so as you're thinking about and listening today, if you do have project ideas or things that we should work on, and Bill was just mentioning one, those could be brought forward into CRC as a project. And we do find friendly API members who want to work on those things with us. So that's just something to keep in mind. So I wanted to talk a little bit about CRC mission and objectives, and there are a few slides I'm going to blow through pretty quickly so we can get to the slides I think you're most interested in. This is an organization that is over 100 years old, and the mission is to direct scientific cooperative research in developing the best possible combinations of fuels, lubricants, and the equipment in which they are used and to afford means of cooperation with the government on matters of natural interest within the field. So this statement has been modified slightly from a strategic planning session we've had just in the last couple of months. But now you can see that the members of this room also are part of this group, and we want to make sure that we bring your voices in. And then when I say we, it's the automakers here that are sitting in a room, and I'm sitting with all of my coordinating research council colleagues are here to help make sure we bring the voice of ethanol into coordinating research council and specifically Sustainable Mobility Committee, where there's a nice fit. The core function of CRC is to enable a process for cooperative research. And so I like to say it's like a statement of work by committee, by consensus. So someone proposes a project and then we work on it together to refine it, to make sure we all agree with the path forward. When we work on that research, we all agree with what the path forward is, what the research oversight and objectives are, and then what the final results in the report that gets published is. So it's a by committee, by consensus approach. And there's a lot of benefits from the synergy between industries. So we're getting a diverse balance of representation, perspectives, technical subject matter experts. So we're getting experience from lots of different people across the field, chemical analysts to engine researchers, a unique knowledge of engines and vehicles, and then inherent knowledge of fuels, fuel production, and energy. So we can work together on these projects. So it's a system approach. And the benefits of this cooperative science facilitated by CRC, and I'm not going to read all these things because again, I think you can go back and read these, and Ernie has the slides and these can be shared, is we want to make an impact, independent, balanced results available to the public to inform regulations and standards. This is leverage research. So we all put in our collective resources of cash, some in-kind support with testing, our technical subject matter experts across our companies, and we produce something that's of much more value and a much larger size than any one of us could do by themselves. We have a diverse technical network of peer researchers, and we're working together in a non-competitive environment. Only through the week, on Saturday and Sunday, it's competitive. Just kidding. And then protection. We make sure to protect the intellectual property and we comply with the antitrust regulations. And so we always have a review every meeting, so that we all know the rules of engagement. And you'll see in some of our meetings, we'll review the rules of engagement of how we work together in this arena. So here's a history of CRC. It's over 100+ years. Began with a CRC committee, CFR committee in SAE, has moved through military research, air quality research. Now we're into a global view of sustainability. And here is our organization. And I'll spend a little time here. So you can see up here at the top is our board of directors, the collection of auto and oil companies that are sustaining member companies. We have 4 auto oil core committees, atmospheric impacts, advanced vehicle fuels and lubricants, emissions committee, and performance committee. There is also an aviation committee aspect here as part of CRC. Within the last 3 years, there's a new committee developed called Sustainable Mobility Committee, and it includes all of these sustaining members who put in membership dues, as well as right now this current list of members, which we call them the Sustainable Mobility Committee funding members. So you can see EMA, Neste, EPRI, so Cummins. We have an interesting mix of funding members. And what's new at CRC in the last 3 years is that we've expanded our research looking at upstream sources for renewables. We have brake and tire wear because that's what we are hearing from Carbon EPA. We like to talk about wildfires and their impact on the criteria emissions, pollutant emissions, electrification, hydrogen. We do a lot of life cycle analysis and techno-economic analysis. And we're also expanding the industry membership. And I like to say that the Sustainable Mobility Committee is the Big 10. It's for all transportation sectors. So medium and heavy duty and non-road, bio and renewable fuels, electrification, and then any really new stakeholders that we think are coming into this mix of sustainable transportation. I am the co-chair of the Sustainability Committee from General Motors. And then my colleague Heather Hamjay right now is the co-chair from ExxonMobil. We will be changing co-chairs in the next couple of months. Our mission is a multi-stakeholder forum for collaborative scientific research similar to CRC, focused on pathways towards carbon neutral future through significant greenhouse gas reductions from mobility while seeking to understand tangential impacts. So that was the mission developed several years ago. We continue to evaluate our mission, and we continue to formulate quite a few projects under our Sustainability Committee. So we call this collection of members our steering committee, and we meet as needed. We have 2 in-person meetings a year. We also have a huge list of partner member groups. These are members who wouldn't necessarily be able to contribute funding projects, but they do contribute by supporting with technical matter experts, subject matter experts, resources that they may have through their laboratories. And these are a lot of the Department of Energy labs, NIST, EPA, CARB, and I may be forgetting a few, but we also have US CAR as a member. So partner members work with us to collaborate on projects so that we can look for leveraging resources, leveraging technical researchers to help promote the research work that we're doing together. So the sustainability has 4 work groups. And again, I'm gonna, for the sake of time, move through these pretty quickly because I want to show you some of the slides about the projects we're currently working on. So electrification, fuels, we have this hydrogen and novel carbon reduction work group. And this is a new change as of last November. And then we have a life cycle analysis group. And if some of you have worked within CRC before, life cycle analysis used to be part of one of the core committees, and now it's part of the Sustainability Committee. And you can see here in the boxes below the kind of project areas that we are currently working in each of these different work groups. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what the work groups are working on, and you'll see some of the characters on the top of this at the leadership here at the meeting. So Melissa Prisbillo is here and Ivan Tibovinsky is here. And here are some of the projects that we've all worked on together. So in each slide, you'll see recent publications, and hopefully the link works in the PDF, but the links to those. You'll see project and final reporting. You'll see active developing projects, and then you also see potential future projects. So projects that have been proposed that maybe didn't get prioritized, waiting for some funding, waiting for some sponsorship to perhaps getting the project moving. So I'm not sure that this group is very interested in these projects, but I want to just kind of explain through the slide so that when we get to the slide where you're interested in, you can see and I will point those out to you. So just as another reminder too, the links, if these links do not work in the PDF, you can go on the CRC website, you can type in the project number or the project title, and then you'll be able to find the report. They're all public and they're all part of the CRC website. Okay, so here's the fuels working group, and here's another character everyone knows who's in the room. Michael Moore is our work group co-chair here, and he's got some really interesting project that he's been working on the last several years. And one project that I think members here will be really important to know is SM1. So this was the first project from Sustainability Committee. It is public, and it's called the Evaluation of Potential for Significant Greenhouse Gas Emission Reduction from ICE Vehicles Operated on Liquid Fuels. I highly recommend going to look at the work because again, this is the project that says to this community, yeah, we have an infrastructure in place, and yes, we can take full advantage of greenhouse gas emission reductions because we have an infrastructure in place. That's my summary bottom line of I think it's a 100 or 200 page report. So also we have some other projects here. Let's see, sustainability and local air quality impacts of future electrification and new vehicle emissions regarding regulation scenarios in the US. So another project that was a second project that was developed under Sustainability Committee. We do have a project SMF5, research in support of future fuel specifications. So this is looking at what available molecules are readily available in the market or could be available in the market, and what are those fuel properties. And that person who is the investigator, Tom Leone, is here if you'd like to talk to him about the project. We're still working on the final report, but I'm sure Tom can share a few details. And some of the potential future projects that some of the, again, leaders and researchers are in the room here that may potentially work on and bid on these. Fuel survey data available from public sources. So we as automakers really need to understand fuel properties, and it's expensive to be collecting samples from 100,000 fuel stations or more in the United States. So we're looking for what data is available from the states, from the counties, perhaps from any kind of agency that may be collecting it. So we're trying to put together just a simple list of where are those reports at? How can we access them? Are they free? Do they cost money? Where can we get the data? So we're beginning a project in this arena, and certainly we're open to hearing from you if you know where some of this data is. We're going to be looking for it, preparing this. It will become public so that we all know where we can find this free accessible data. Some other projects of interest here, I think for this group here is evaluation of mid-level ethanol blends. This is actually going to be E16 to E50. So we have a project that's been proposed. We're currently working on the statement of work, and then it will be sent out for bid. And I know there's some members in this room who have worked on E16 to E50 for many years in their career, and we encourage you to please bid on that so we can identify where are the research gaps in the literature so that when we are ready to implement E16 to E50, we know what we technically need to do. And so quite often CRC will run a literature review in advance of some kind of a technical experimental section. So keep that in mind. There will be another project coming. This is actually a project funded out of the core committees. And I asked that this be open and available so that we could just review it and talk with you about it here. So this is additional money from the sustaining member companies put into Sustainability Committee so that we could, again, share in this knowledge and invite you to become participants. Okay, so let's see here, moving on. Let me just see. So yes, moving on here. So this is the hydrogen and novel carbon reduction work group. And again, we see the SM1 project listed here. This was a project that fit many groups. There was also another project, SMCR9, that has been just completed, basically to identify challenges in battery recharging and hydrogen refueling infrastructure, the challenges to meet the new regulations. So some very interesting work there. Projects in final reporting, carbon sources for e-fuels. And then again, I'm not going to go through all these, but I just wanted to make sure you're aware of some of the projects that have hit the list for hydrogen and novel carbon reduction. So there's where we stand. And there may actually be more projects than actually are in that list, that just showing you 5 or 6 of them. And then there's life cycle analysis. And some of the projects that have just recently reported, SM-LCA 17, review of selected models used for biofuel greenhouse gas determinations and comparison of results for 2 fuels. So LCA 17, that report is available. There's a follow-on project looking at how can we improve those models in comparison on some additional fuels in a follow-up study. The life cycle analysis group also puts together the life cycle analysis workshop that's hosted at Argonne National Lab every other year. That will be this year, and it will be this fall in October. Anyone here in the room is welcome to attend that. Just look out on the CRC website for the information to register. And again, you can see there's other projects for potential future projects. Again, we have limited funding and budget, but we have to prioritize based on what the member companies and the steering committee members see as the current need. And then we move forward with that. And we're always reaching out to other members in particular to join a project or our group so that we can move some of these projects forward and start working on them. So the Sustainability Committee, Steering Committee, there's membership options. So remember, the current sustaining members, we contribute $200,000 a year. In addition to the other projects I mentioned that we've brought into Sustainability Committee. Most of the funding members are at the $25,000 level for 2 voting seats. And the funding members actually have more voting seats than the sustaining members. So It hasn't become a problem, but we like to let you know, we make sure that your voice is double counted so that your projects are getting through. No single company will be accorded more than 25% of the voting member seats. So we do have some rules we set up, and we continue to evaluate those rules within all of the steering committee members. So again, your voice is fairly reflected in project prioritization. And then again, just the final slide here, I'm going to just mention again, the life cycle analysis workshop is at Argonne National Lab, and it is in October 2025. The sustainability, we also have a workshop we've had it almost every year now. It actually will be next spring in conjunction with the SAE World Congress. And so CRC actually has quite many technical meetings and special events that invite outside participation. And many of us were at the Real World Emissions event this year. So this is my last slide. And I know I talked for about 20 minutes. So if anyone has questions, you can ask me here, or we can take those at the networking reception.
Thank you, Elena. We have time for maybe a couple questions.
I just wanted to let you know that
project is the RFP is on the CRC website, and that's a place to go to look for any current projects that are available for bidding.
Yeah, thank you. So Melissa's letting you know that the details of that mid-level blend statement of work and RFP are on the website now. So you can download those and you can find out more detail about that particular project.
Sorry, more of a comment than a question, and appreciate you guys coming and talking through this. I mean, I will say the E15 work from a decade plus ago was problematic for us. So I think we're glad to sort of see the outreach here and sort of really get more eyes wide open on what you guys are doing and some of the work you have ahead that look at some of the things that I think we all have an interest in. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And I will say, you know, one comment Bill said, and I'll amplify that again, is feel free to come talk to us about, you know, not only the work we're doing in CRC, but other work that maybe we think we need to do that maybe we can't get into CRC either because of funding or, you know, the challenging relationships we all have to navigate. And so we do continue, and I take personal, I make it personal to talk with the other members within CRC is, you know, this community needs to be represented. We need to have your voice and hear your voice. And I know recently we reached out and had a nice meeting with Christy Moore on the membership. And so, you know, we test the waters with the other members, and certainly the auto side members who are here, we're in support of trying to navigate our way forward.
All right, any more questions? Okay, well, thanks, Elena.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that'll end day one of our AAE meeting, but we do have a network reception in the flight deck. Does that start, Ernie, that says 5:30, does that, okay, at 5:30, so we have a few minutes, but it's a flight deck lounge. Okay, yeah, promptly at 5:30. Thanks.